Htp family. Today we're gonna do another reading. This one's gonna be, well, I'm gonna do a skimming because this is a white boy, so we're actually gonna do a skimming. But Htp, obviously, if you want to join the conversation, you can click the Discord link in the description, or you can check out the chat and you can see it there. But for the most part, we're gonna get right into this. This is What Is to Be Done by Vladimir Lenin. The only reason why I'm looking into this is because this was like printed, I guess, in 1902, so it's contemporary with Garvey. But the reason why I'm reading this is because essentially Lenin has this thing called vanguardism, okay? And vanguardism is a really important theory, right, or a school of thought in like modern quote unquote revolutionary discourse, you know. And so this is allegedly the book where you would find it in, and for that reason, I think it's worth looking into. So we're gonna skim it though because it's a white boy, like I said, and there's no real reason to really read white people. But I mean, you can read it if you want, but I don't really want to. So check this out. If you look at the table of contents though, it's actually pretty interesting. So it says dogmatism and freedom of criticism. So that's pretty interesting, right? He has the spontaneity of the masses and the consciousness of the social democrats. So social democrats is pretty much the liberals, right? And so, but of course the masses being spontaneous. And this is actually pretty interesting to understand, like not just in terms of riots and rebellions which have gone back, time immemorial, but also in terms of panic. Like when coronavirus first happened, the people were panicked. The people were panicking. Trade unionist politics and social democratic politics. Again, this would be the liberals versus the fascists. At this point in time, they weren't really the fascists per se. And the privilege of the economists and the organization of the revolutionaries. So then he's going to go into revolution. And of course, the plan for an all-Russia political newspaper, which of course we could translate to an all-Africa political newspaper. Something that I actually wished we had, but, it's not really forthcoming. So in the meantime, between time, definitely drop your comments. Definitely, you can join the chat if you so please. But for the most part, we're going to try to focus on getting this reading through. So let's see, notes on the text, printable version, it's from the Marxist, blah, blah, blah. Page numbers, Lenin's key work on party objectives and organization. Alright, so this is probably the synopsis. So this may reference the page numbers within this document. These page numbers are maintained during the transcription process to remain faithful to the original edition and not this version, and therefore are likely to be inaccurate. This statement applies only to the text itself and not any indices or table of contents which have been reproduced for this edition. Lenin's key work, so that was stupid. They should have just revisited the numbers, but alright. Lenin's key work on party objectives and organization. Lenin argues that, so this is one of his key works on party objectives and organization. Lenin argues that while capitalism predisposes the worker to the essence of socialism, it does not spontaneously make them conscious socialists. The proletariat of its own can achieve only trade union consciousness. Accordingly, it was necessary to institute a party of a new type capable of imbuing the working class with revolutionary consciousness. This is the origin of Lenin's famous theory of the party as vanguard of the proletariat. He conceived of the vanguard as a highly centralized body organized around a core of experienced professional revolutionaries. Only such a party could succeed in the conditions of illegality prevailing in Tsarist Russia at the time. The book also contains an attack on revisionism. So that's actually pretty much the only reason why this is actually the only reason why I would read the book, and it's already been summarized because I made a point about it in the on Twitter. So if you're not following me on Twitter, make sure you handle that. You do your @ I don't know how you do it, but you just search my name, Onitaset, and then you find me, obviously. Alright, so according to the author's original plan, so this is the preface, the present pamphlet was to have been devoted to a detailed development of the ideas expressed in the article Where to Begin. We must first apologize to the reader for the delay in fulfilling the promise made in that article and repeated in response to many private inquiries and letters. One of the reasons for this delay was the attempt undertaken in June of the past year to unite all the social democratic organizations abroad. It is natural to wait for the results of this attempt for had a successful. Alright, so he's just telling you that he already wrote this thing Where to Begin, and then now he's What Is to Be Done. So the reason why this is important is because we at the moment, as Africans who seriously want to get things done, we're also having these same questions. Where to begin? What is to be done? So it's just worthwhile to look at other people who, and of course these are white people, but they're dealing with quote unquote imperialism as well, in a different sense, obviously. But they're not necessarily we're such historic victims, but more so understanding that the present conditions are such that they can overcome it, and we have to also embrace that. And of course, a lot of people will tell you, hey, you know what, a lot of Africa's liberators in the 60s and so forth were socialists, and this is partly the reason why, because the socialists are writing manuals on how to take over and overtake the same word, right? But anyway, overtake the capitalists and the imperialists, and then we as African people, we're kind of sitting by, whining about how much we are victims and how slavery impacted us and how we should get some money or something, reparations. Pretty much the trade unionist philosophy, trade unionist consciousness that is obviously being abhorred in this article. Hold on a second, let me drop my light. I have like 100 lights on. Not really, I have 2 on, but it's just too many. Alright. Too many. Alright. So let's see. The main theme, 3 questions raised in the article: where to begin, the character and main content of our political agitation, our organizational task, and the plan for building simultaneously and from various sides a militant all-Russia organization. Whenever you see the word Russia in this article, you can say Africa, or you could say Ancobia, or you could say, whatever country you believe is the vanguard, or who should host the vanguard. And so vanguard pretty much means the front line. So it's when he says all Russia organization, you can say Pan-African organization. So the idea here is to organize a militant Pan-African organization, and that's really what it comes down to. Now, of course, you want it to be local, and that's the reason why I said you want to break down in the specification, because all Africa is too broad unless you have a huge amount of membership, But if you have, let's say, 5,000 people across the world, that's nothing. If you have 5,000 people in one city, that's something, okay? So, but the original plan to confine the pamphlet to an analysis of only these 3 questions and to set forth our view, possible in positive form, almost without entering into polemics, proved wholly impractical for 2 reasons. On the one hand, economism proved to be much more tenacious than we supposed. We employ the term economism in the broad sense as explained in Iskra in the article entitled A Talk with Defenders of Economism, which was a synopsis, so to speak, of the present pamphlet. It became clear beyond doubt that the difference regarding the solution of the 3 questions mentioned were explainable to a far greater degree by the basis antithesis between the 2 trends in the Russian social democratic movement than by differences over them. So if you see social democrat, I'm not really too sure, but I'm going to just say it's going to be like the Democrats in America, or the Labour Party in the UK. Basically, it turns out that it's very common for, Western democracies, if you will, or Western republics, or whatever you want to call them, to have 2 political parties, like 2 main political parties, one being the conservative, one being the liberal, and they just go through this drama of being, heavy opposition to one another. But of course, they're both the powers that be. Now, that's not to say that one isn't better than the other. It's just to say that, it is in fact something that they've been doing for over a century. So like the idea that one is going to be the other, and the thing is, that's not that one can't be the other. It's just that if one does beat the other, then there's going to be a vacuum. You understand? And then it's going to be replaced with. So basically, it's just a systemic, like opposition, ad infinitum. But it's not to say that. But again, it's not to say that one isn't better than the other. It's just to say that it's just a constant. It's just a constant thing that goes on. Because you just couldn't not have it. But basically it's like I want to say like Newton, like how they call Isaac Newton, like laws of physics, where it's like every action is an equal and opposite reaction. That essentially you're in a system that is supposed to go one way, and so it can pull and push, politically, but it's every time it pulls, there's another push. You know what I mean? Like it's just kind of fixed in a sense, because that's what a system is. The system doesn't necessarily just go with the wind. A lot of us wish that things went with the wind, but they don't. So you have this, radical change. You have this mixed man in the office of the presidency, and then like the whole world just goes conservative. You know what I'm saying? Like the whole world just kind of goes reactionary. But that's what you'd expect. It's a system that fixes itself. Just the same if there's what was it? Fascist, like a hyper fascist, like Hitler or whatever, right? Then the whole world kind of just says, you know what? Let's all unite and make peace with each other. So it goes in both directions. I resolved to make such an attempt at clarification, fully realizing that it would greatly increase the size of the pamphlet and delay its publication. I saw no other way of meeting my pledge I made and where to begin. So he's talking about the fact that it's supposed to be a pamphlet, whatever. The examination of the above three questions still constitute the main theme of this pamphlet, but I found it necessary to begin with two questions of a more general nature. Why such an innocent and natural slogan as freedom of criticism should be for us a veritable war cry, and why we cannot come to an understanding even on the fundamental question of the role of social democrats in relation to the spontaneous mass movement. Further, the exposition of our views on the character and substance of political agitation developed into an explanation of the difference between trade unionist politics and social democratic politics, while the exposition of our views on organizational tasks developed into an explanation of the difference between the amateurish methods which satisfy the economists and the organization of revolutionaries, which we hold to be indispensable. Further, I advanced the plan for an all-Russia political newspaper with all the more insistence because the objections raised against it are untenable, and because no real answer has been given to the question I raised in the article, where to begin as to how it can set the work on sides simultaneously to create the organization we need. Finally, in the concluding part, and so this is actually pretty important because we know that Garvey creates a all-Africa newspaper, like an all-Africa political newspaper, and that's instrumental toward the freedom of Africa. Okay, so a lot of the liberation movements in Africa owe themselves to Marcus Garvey, to the point where quite a few of the political leaders of Africa, including the one in Nigeria and the one in Ghana and the one in Kenya and so on, were students or met with Garvey, and on top of that were part of Garvey's movement. So Nnamdi Azikiwe, he was, he became one of the main liberators of Nigeria, if you will, and he was actually working on the UNIA's newspaper. So this is like he used to post articles in the newspaper. So it's like an all African newspaper. This is really up our alley, and it's actually interesting that this is one of the things that Lenin is talking about, because we know that Garvey comes to America and there's a bunch of newspapers already in place, not just from the socialists, but from just the black liberals and of course the black conservatives, if you will, and they're kind of just doing some degrading newspapers. But Garvey comes along and he does better. But it's very important to realize just the context and how the world is, because we're saying to ourselves, why are we reading Lenin? But it's like this could have been relevant to Garvey. Not to say that Garvey could have read it or whatever, but just to say that part of how the world is operating and how the world is that sometimes these things just meld together. And it's worth noting that Garvey did, after Lenin passed, he did give a few I want to say praises, but Garvey did a lot of that kind of stuff. But it's not completely out of the blue or completely unreasonable. Just giving context. All right, let's keep going. So, what does freedom of criticism mean? So, freedom of criticism is undoubtedly the most fashionable slogan at the present time, and the one most frequently employed in the controversies between socialists and Democrats in all countries. At first sight, nothing would appear to be more strange than the solemn appeals to freedom of criticism made by one of the parties to the dispute. Have voices been raised in the advanced parties against the constitutional law of the majority of European countries, which guarantees freedom to science and scientific investigation? Something must be wrong here, will be the comment of the onlooker who has heard this fashionable slogan repeated at every turn, but has not yet penetrated the essence of the disagreement among the disputants. Evidently, this slogan is one of the conventional phrases which, like nicknames, become legitimized by use and become almost generic terms. So, have voice. So, in fact, it is no secret for anyone that two trends have taken form in the present-day international social democracy. The conflict between these trends now flares up in a bright flame and now dies down and smolders under the ashes of imposing true revolutions. the essence of the new trend, which adopts a critical attitude towards absolute dogmatic Marxism, has been clearly enough presented by Bernstein and demonstrated by Miller. So these are just names that I wouldn't know what that means. All right. Social democracy must change from a party of social revolution into a democratic party of social reforms. Must change from a party of social revolution into a democratic party of social reform. So this is the thing that the Democratic Party is actually. It's just a party of social reforms. And again, like I said, it's not necessarily bad. It's just that it's not necessarily, but it's not revolution. And that's really the complaint that quote unquote revolutionaries would have. But of course, a lot of people that call themselves revolutionaries aren't really revolutionaries. They're just complaining. Bernstein has surrounded his political demand with a whole battery of well-attuned new arguments and reasonings. Denied was the possibility of putting socialism on a scientific basis and demonstrating its necessity and inevitability from the point of view of the materialist conception of history. Denied was the fact of growing impoverishment, the process of... Yeah, you see, this is what I'm saying. So, has surrounded political demand with a new battery of well-attuned new arguments and reasoning. So, the thing is that, alright, right here, denied was the possibility of putting socialism on a scientific basis and demonstrating its necessity and inevitability from... So the Marxists are arguing, hey, it's inevitable and necessary that socialism on a scientific basis comes about, right? Because there's going to be growing impoverishment. Because, what proletarization does. Proletarization does, like working, just what is working and being like a factory, whatever. What does that do for you? The intensification of capitalist contradictions. All of this... they're all in sound if you go through with reform, particularly if you're in the first world, as I would call it, or whatever. So the dictatorship of the proletariat was rejected, and so liberalism was seen as a viable alternative to socialism. And this is actually pretty important. Like this is pretty important because some what is it called, socialists would tell you, oh well, even though the first world is doing fine, there's of course the masses, or the masses of blacks as well, or the masses of people outside of the first world in the quote unquote third world, the developed world, the developing world. But again, the socialist thing is that it's really just a theory that it really isn't grounded. But of course, Lenin believes in it deeply, so he's going to argue, accordingly. Was a theory of the class struggle on the alleged grounds that it could not be applied to a strictly democratic socialist society governed by the will of the majority. Yeah. So thus the demand for a decisive turn from revolutionary social democracy to bourgeois social reformism was accompanied by no less decisive turn towards bourgeois criticism of all the fundamental ideas of Marxism. Exactly. In view of the fact that this criticism of Marxism has long been directed from the political platform from university chairs in numerous pamphlets and a series of learned treatises, in view of the fact that the entire younger generation of educated classes was systematically reared for decades on this criticism, is not surprising that the new critical trend in social democracy should spring up all complete like Minerva from the head of Jove. The content of this new trend did not have to grow and take shape. It was transferred bodily from the to the socialist movement.
No, they're not.
Hold on a second.
No, they're not.
Alright, yeah. So, to proceed, if Bernstein's theoretical criticism of political yearnings were still unclear to anyone, the French took the trouble strikingly to demonstrate the new methods. In this instance, too, the France has justified its old reputation of being the land where, more than anywhere else, the historical class struggles were each time fought to a decision. Basically, he's just telling you the socialist, so on and so forth. He does not deliberately close his eyes to the new critical trend. Yeah, but the thing is this, the socialists, the way how the capitalists or the quote-unquote bourgeois, the bourgeois are being a claim to not necessarily give you, to be misleading the people. But realistically speaking, if you really look at the social reform theory, it really isn't that bad for the people who the reforms benefit. It might be bad globally or internationally, but it's not necessarily that bad for the people who the reforms benefit. Yeah, so freedom is a grand word, but under the banner of industry, let's see if we could try to understand this freedom of criticism though. Freedom is a grand word, but under the banner of freedom for industry, the most predatory wars were waged under the banner of freedom of labor. The working people were robbed. The modern use of the term freedom of criticism contains the same inherent falsehood. Those who are really convinced that they have made progress in science would not demand freedom for the new views to continue side by side with the old, but the substitution of the new views for the old. The cry heard today, long live freedom of criticism, is too strongly reminiscent of the fable of the empty barrel. So, it looks like he's against the term freedom of criticism. And that's the thing, that's actually a troubling thing with socialism. I mean, he's going to say it's better to be dogmatic, because ideally the socialist rhetoric is flawless, accordingly to him, but it's actually not flawless, and it is flawed. And for what it's worth, not to agree with the bourgeoisie, but for what it's worth, it's important that we that you do have that criticism. So let's see. Marching into a conference. So the new advocates of freedom of criticism. Now this slogan is solemn. It is possible to unite the operating abroad for durable unity. Hold on a second. All right. So it particularly displays that the inclination of Iskra and Zaria represents a shallow historical analogy, a strange thing to come from the pen of Marxists. The mountains. Hold on a second. So it's bold assertion. Let's just skim through because this is a bunch of history that it's not really that interesting. Paris Commune and observe the matchless profundity, the few. Yeah, not interesting. Alright, the numerous other champions of freedom criticism is the most pronounced Bernstein's. They still tolerate the ranks of the German party to submit and to. It is debatable from the standpoint of the interest the German party. Therefore, to think that the Germans' example confirms the theory. Yeah. So he's just talking about some parties. Again, these parties are from like 100 years ago, and he's talking about them like you would know them, but obviously, 100 years ago, you know what I mean? Like you don't really know. Like 100 years ago in Germany, it's not really something that I would know in the middle of America without any focus on Europe. But of course, if you're more inclined to think about that, you're welcome to read it. This is like pretty much free, and you can click the link in the description. So the chief distinguishing feature of Russia in regards to the point we are examining is that the very beginning of the spontaneous working class movement on the one hand, and of the turn of progressive public opinion towards Marxism on the other, was marked by the combination of manifestly heterogeneous elements under a common flag to fight the common enemy, the absolute social and political world outlook. We refer to the heyday of legal Marxism, speaking generally that this was altogether a curious phenomenon that no one in the 80s or the beginning of the 90s would have believed possible. In a country ruled by an autocracy with a completely enslaved press, in a period of desperate political reaction in which even the tiniest outgrowth of political discontent and protest is persecuted, the theory of revolutionary Marxism suddenly forces its way into the censored literature, and though expounded in the Aesopian language, is understood by all the interested. The government had accustomed itself to regarding only the theory of the revolutionary Narodная Volya as dangerous, without, as is usual, observing its internal evolution and addressing any criticism leveled against it. Quite a considerable time elapsed by our Russian standards before the government realized what had happened, and then really army of censors and gendarmes discovered a new enemy and flung itself upon him. Meanwhile, Marxist books were published one after the other. Marxist journals and newspapers were founded. Nearly everyone became a Marxist. Marxism Marxists were flattered. Marxists were courted, and the book publishers rejoiced at the extraordinary ready sale of Marxist literature. It is quite natural, therefore, that among the Marxian neophytes who were caught up in this atmosphere, there should be more than one author who got his own head. So this is actually pretty interesting. So what he's saying here is that Russia. Now this is like you can't even put this on our people. So Aesopian language basically means I would assume fables, like in the language of fables, in the language of like simple language, right? As opposed to that, right? But here's the thing: they had books that were published one after the other, journals, newspapers, and people were just reading and just eating it up, right? And this is quote unquote revolutionary literature, right? But so it's literature that's against the state, and this is what's important for anybody to understand is that when you're like a state has an interest in keeping itself, in power, right? The state has an interest in keeping itself in power, but instead of doing so, right? I mean, sorry. So in order to do so, though, it is supposed to try to cut back on anything that evokes revolution in a sense. Because revolution is to revolt or to do a revolution or to complete a revolution, or revolution is to go against the state. You see, that's why again, like I say, it doesn't really make much sense to be a revolutionary in America, in so much as this is the capital of America. It's better to be a revolutionary in the colony. I mean, not to say that's it's not impossible, it's not impractical, but particularly if you look at how imperialism is shaped, in a sense, particularly today, if you understand America to be the hardest, or if you understand America to be the toughest enemy, then you wouldn't necessarily fight it in its capital. You would fight it abroad. Like the thing with Russia, for instance, is that maybe like they said, like France and so on, other countries like France and Germany and all that were propping up the Russian government. Just the same as in Africa, you have France, England, Europe, and so forth might be propping up the government, or America might be propping up the government. So in that sense, they're weaker by being more dependent on another, by being dependent on an outside power. And of course that's a really complicated matter, to get into. But this is fundamental. The idea that they were distributing this literature freely and broadly, and they were eating it up. And of course, the reason why I say this is interesting is because what we find is that for our people, it's like there's a phrase that says if you want to hide something from an African, put it in the book. So the thing is that you can almost say well, I know these Russians ain't Africans. You know what I'm saying? No, I'm just messing. But you kind of get that they are in fact using literature as a means for radicalizing the people, which is something that we ourselves discourage among ourselves. I don't know what we could do. Like, I don't know how we could make it simpler and easier to make literature a radicalizing thing in the African world. I kind of feel like this journals thing, this newspaper thing, because before I was telling you I wanted to write a newspaper for black folk, but I never really got off the ground. I have this PDF file, but it's just not off the ground yet, and that's and it's like it's just really, it's not as easy as you would think, and maybe it is as easy as you think, but for me it hasn't been that easy. So we can now speak calmly on this period as an event of the past. It is no secret that the brief period in which Marxism blossomed on the surface of our literature was called forth by an alliance between the people of extreme and very moderate views. In point of fact, the latter were bourgeois Democrats. This conclusion, so markedly confirmed by their subsequent critical development, lends itself to even more alliance with Marxism. That being the case, Social Democrats, this, blah, blah. The combination with the legal Marxists was in their first really political alliance entered into the Russian Social Democrats. The rupture, of course. However, the Bernsteins, I don't know who Bernstein is. Naturally, under such circumstances, the rupture was necessary, but the peculiar feature of Russia manifested itself in the fact that this rupture simply meant the elimination of the Social Democrats and the most accessible and widespread legal literature. The ex-Marxists who took up the flag of criticism, who attained almost a monopoly to demolish Marxism, entrenched themselves in the literature, catchwords like against orthodoxy and long live freedom of criticism. So he's saying that, because the thing is this, again, like I said, social democracy is not necessarily, like social democracy does in fact kill revolutionary mindset, but like it makes a lot of sense. It's not like, oh my gosh, why would you, it makes a lot of sense. The manner in which the connection between the interdependence of legal criticism and illegal economism arose and grew is in itself an interesting subject, one that could serve as the theme of a special article. We need only note here that the connection undoubtedly existed, and the notoriety deservedly acquired by the credo was due precisely to the frankness of which we formulated the connection and built up the fundamental political tendency of communism. Let the workers carry out the economic struggle. It would be more correct to say the trade unionist struggle, because the latter also embraced specifically working class politics, and let the Marxist intelligentsia merge with the liberals for the political struggle. This trade unionist work among the people meant fulfilling the first part of the task, while legal criticism meant fulfilling the second. The statement was such an excellent weapon against the economism that has been no credo. So, displayed by the advocates of freedom of criticism cannot be attributed solely to craftiness. The question now arises. Alright, so basically, as you can see, he's talking about dogmatism. I actually thought he was going to say that he was open to free criticism, but apparently that's not the case, and that, instead you want to be dogmatic. Or at least his idea is that, being dogmatic is, in fact, a better idea. And I mean, that is, that's interesting. That's interesting in the sense that, I mean, like I said, I couldn't necessarily go along with those lines. I couldn't necessarily go along with those lines. Alright, so dogmatism, doctrinarianism, ossification of the party, the inevitable retribution that follows the violent straight-lacing of thoughts. These are the enemies against which the nightly champions of freedom criticism is rise up in arms. We are very glad that this question has been placed on the order of the day, and we would only propose to add it in other. And who are the judges? Let's see. So let's see. We have before us two. Let's see. Yeah, because I just want to skip through it because it's like, a lot of it's just history. A lot of it is irrelevant to today. It's more interesting. Like, if you're really down for socialism, that's one thing, but I don't really care for it. And of course, if he's saying, "Oh, we shouldn't be criticized," it's like I'd rather just read that than read a whole bunch of nonsense around it. The other announcement, on the contrary, points first of all to the declining interest in theory in recent years, imperatively demands vigilant attention to the theoretical aspect of the revolutionary movement and the proletarian, calls for ruthless criticism of the Bernsteins and other anti-revolutionary tendencies in our movement. The issue of so there, because the thing is this too, that I get it, idealistically, I mean, the way how it's seen is that, well, there's two things. So here's what it is, right? It's not so much that Marxism doesn't get a criticism as much as Marxism, well, not really Marxism, but as much as revolution doesn't, you shouldn't be able to criticize revolution, but so I mean, in a sense, alright, so the way how, sometimes I would say, but the thing is this, that it's you have to be realistic, and that's the thing that a lot of people aren't. It's they're not really realistic. So, I mean, not to say that they're not, I mean, it's complicated, it's complicated, but basically, it goes like this. They want to, all right. For instance, look at the example of Nigeria. Okay, in Nigeria right now, there are Africans who want to absolutely dismantle the government, and then there are other Africans who want the government to be in the hands of the youth. Okay, who want the government to be in new hands, new management. Some people are under the impression that it will not work. There are some people who are even under the impression that they must fracture and fragment Nigeria. You understand? There are other people who are under the impression that they must have, like Nigeria and its neighboring states should combine and become a super nation. The point being though, but the point though is that some people believe that this, like whatever their solution is, whether it's a larger Nigeria, whether it's a smaller Nigeria, whether it's the same Nigeria, right? They believe that it could be achieved through militancy. And there are some people who believe that it could be attained through legalism, in a sense, right? Through electoral principles, right? And so, essentially, the people who believe that this could be attained through electoral principles, which is not really something that's unreasonable, right? But they're the ones who are basically offering this criticism. And so, but Lenin, who believes it should only be militant, I suppose, right? Is saying no, that we don't want that kind of freedom of criticism because that's against revolution and it's only reform. You know what I mean? So even if I were to say, hey, you know what? Let's make a bigger state. Let's make a larger state, and let's all have other people vote on it, right? That's reform. Okay? Even though it's great, it has a good solution, a good ending, it's reform, right? If I say, let's get the young people inside, we have so many young, talented African people, let's get them into power in Nigeria or whatever, right? That's reform. You have the same system, you want to change it slowly, blah, blah, blah. That's reform. So he's saying, if the literature on Pan-Africanism was geared toward that he doesn't want that sort of criticism. And to me, that's kind of myopic, I'm not saying it's myopic, but I understand why people would go the electoral route. I understand why people would go the electoral route. That's what I'm saying. And I'm not necessarily going to, and I could understand why somebody would say that's not revolutionary. Okay? But I'm not really necessarily going to sit back and say that it's unreasonable. Because a lot of people do not want, large scale war in Nigeria or whatever country they're in. They don't want to go through war or years of combat and eventually, without necessarily knowing what's on the other end. Because a lot of times what's on the other end could be a dictator. When France had its revolution, Napoleon came to power. Germany, with Hitler, he came in electorally. But then he became, so it's like, it's there's a lot to it. And of course it's Europe. I mean, in Africa, obviously, in Nigeria, I should say, there was in fact a dictator that came out after a coup. But also, of course, there was and I think as a dictator, I think was what you call the Third Republic, or the third, between the Second and Fourth Republic of, or the Second and Third. I don't recall. I have to look it up. But the point being that you will have like it's uncertain. But to criticize somebody and say, oh well, you don't want to do this thing militantly. It's like, yeah, I don't think everybody wants to go to war. I think war is the most important instrument in human relations. All right, war is the most important instrument in human relations, but I entirely understand if not everybody wants to go through it, right? So every step of the real movement is more important than a dozen programs. To repeat these words in a period of theoretical disorder is like wishing mourners at a funeral many happy returns of the day. Moreover, these words of Marx are taken from his letter on the Gotha program, in which he sharply condemns eclecticism in the formulation of principles. If you must unite, Marx wrote to the party leaders, then enter into agreements to satisfy the practical aims of the movement, but do not allow any bargaining over principles. Do not make theoretical concessions. This was Marx's idea, and yet there are people among us who seek in his name to belittle the significance of theory. So yeah, they're really trying to. Well, I understand, without revolutionary theory, there can be no revolutionary movement. This idea cannot be insisted upon too strongly at a time when the fashionable preaching of opportunism goes hand in hand with infatuation of the narrowest forms of practical activity. Yet for Russian social democrats, the importance of theory is enhanced by three other circumstances which are often forgotten. First, by the fact that our party is only the process of formation, its features are only just becoming defined and has yet, from settled accounts, which the other trends of revolutionary thought are threatened to divert the movement from the correct path. On the contrary, precisely the very recent past was marked by a revival of non-social democratic. All right. So let's go on. Secondly, the social democratic movement is the very essence of the international movement. Is the very essence of international? This means not only must we combine. Hold on a second. Alright, so secondly, the Social Democrats. Yes, this kid doesn't understand electricity for some reason. Alright. It's like, what? Alright, so as an international movement, this movement not only it must combat national chauvinism, but an incipient movement. Young country can be successful only if it makes use of the experiences of other countries. In order to make use of the experiences, it is not entirely enough merely to be acquainted with them or simply to copy on the latest resolutions. What is required is the ability to treat these experiences critically and to test them independently. He who realizes how enormously the modern working class movement has grown and branched out will understand what a reserve of theoretical forces and political as well as revolutionary experiences required to carry out this task. Thirdly, the national task of Russian social democracy as such as have never confronted any other socialist party in the world. We shall have occasion further on to deal with the political and organizational duties with the task of emancipating the whole people from the yoke of autocracy imposed upon us. At this point, we wish to state only that the role of the vanguard fighter can be fulfilled only by a party that is guided by the most advanced theory. To have a concrete understanding of what this means, let the reader recall such predecessors of Russian social democracy as Herskin, Belinsky, Trotsky. Let them ponder over the world. Let us quote what Engels said in 1874 concerning the significance of the theory in the social democratic movement. Engels recognized not two forms of the great struggle of social democracy, political and economic, as in the fashion among us, but three, placing the theoretical struggle on a par with the first two. His recommendations to the German working class movement, which have become strong practically and politically, are so instructive from the standpoint of present-day problems and controversies that we hope that readers will not be vexed with us quoting a long passage from his refractory blah, blah, blah. What's interesting is that this was written in 1874. Like, Engels wrote this in 1874, so, 30 years, not even 30 years passed, 28 years passed between Engels' writing and the thing. And so it's a little more relevant to Lenin, obviously. But, particularly since, Russia's probably just catching up with Germany by this point. But, 100 years later with computers and this, it's like, why are you going into that? Why are you going into this theory? This land of theory. So the German workers have two important advantages over those of the rest of Europe. First, they belong to the most theoretical people of Europe, and they have retained that sense of theory which the so-called educated classes of Germany have almost completely lost. Without German philosophy, which preceded it, particularly that of Hegel, German scientific socialism, the only scientific socialism that has ever existed, would never have come into being. So that's pretty interesting too, that the way how he describes scientific socialism is, he says it's German scientific socialism. So it's without German philosophy, particularly of Hegel, German scientific socialism. Alright. So without a sense of theory among the workers, this scientific socialism would never have entered their flesh and blood as much as is the case. What an immeasurable advantage this is may be seen, on the other hand, from the indifference towards all theory, which is one of the main reasons why the English working class movement crawls along so slowly in spite of the splendid organization of the individual unions. On the other hand, from the mischief and confusion wrought by Proudhonism in its original form among the French and Belgians, and in the form further caricatured by Bakunin among the Spaniards and Italians. So, oh my gosh, you see, this is why it's good to read these people, because you see how Engels emphasizes how fundamental the philosophy of a people are towards how they retain or even explain their own scientific socialism. You know, so a lot of times people say, "Oh no, there's only one scientific socialism," blah blah blah, right? But then here you have Engels, going through the list of Europeans. You understand? He goes through the list of Europeans, but also he even specifically says German scientific socialism. But let's go. The second event is that, chronologically speaking, the Germans were about the last to come into the workers' movement. Just as German theoretical socialism will never forget that it rests on the shoulders of Saint Simon, Fourier, and Owen, three men who, in spite of all their fantastic notions and all their utopianism, have their place among the most eminent thinkers of all time, and whose genius anticipated innumerable things, the correctness of which is now being scientifically proven by us. So the practical workers' movement in Germany ought never to forget that it has developed on the shoulders of the English and French movements, that it was able simply to utilize their daily bought experience and could now avoid their mistakes, which is the time are mostly unavoidable. Without the precedent of the English trade unions and French workers' political struggle, and the gigantic impulses given, especially by the Paris Commune, where would we be now? It must be said to the credit of the German workers that they have exploited the advantages of their situation with rare understanding. For the first time since that workers' movement has existed, the struggle is being conducted pursuant to its three sides: the theoretical, the political, and the practical economic resistance to the capitalists in harmony and as a connection and in the systematic way. It is precisely in this, as it were, concentric attack of the strength and invisibility of the German movement lies. Due to the advantageous situation, on the other hand, so I mean, Engels does seem pretty interesting, right? And the insular peculiarities of the English and the forcible expression of the French movement on the other, the German workers have, for the moment, been placed in the vanguard of the proletarian struggle. How long events will allow them to occupy this post of honor cannot be foretold, but let us hope that as long as they occupy it, they will fill it fittingly. This demands redoubled efforts and every effort of struggle and agitation. In particular, it will be the duty of the leaders to gain an ever clearer insight into the theoretical questions, to free themselves more and more from the influence of traditional phrases inherited from the old world outlook, and constantly to keep in mind that socialism, since it has become a clear science, demands that it be pursued as a science that is studied. The task will be to spread with increased zeal among the masses of the workers that ever more clarified understanding thus acquired, to knit together even more firmly the organization both of the party and of the trade unions. If the German workers progress in this way, they will not be marching exactly at the head of the movement. It is not at all the interest of this movement and the workers of any particular country should march at its head, but they will occupy an honorable place in the battle line, and they will stand armed for the battle when either unexpectedly grave trials or momentous events demand of them increased courage, increased determination, and energy. Engels' words prove prophetic. Within a few years, German workers were subjected to unexpectedly grave trials in the form of exceptional law against the socialists, and they made their trials armed for battle and succeeded in emerging from them victorious. The Russian proletariat will have to undergo trials immeasurably grave, for it will have to fight a monster compared with which an anti-socialist law in the unconstitutional country seems but a dwarf. History has now confronted us with an immediate task, which is the most revolutionary of all the immediate tasks confronting the proletariat of any country. The fulfillment of this task, the destruction of the most powerful bulwark, not only of European, but it may now be said of Asiatic reaction, will make the Russian proletariat the vanguard of the international revolutionary proletariat. Now they have the right to count upon acquiring the honorable title already earned by our predecessors, the revolutionaries of the 70s, if we succeed in inspiring our movement, which is 1,000 times broader and deeper, with the same devoted determination and vigor. So that's right there where he mentions the vanguard. So the spontaneity of the masses. Alright. We have said that our movement, which more extensive and deep than the movement of the 70s, must be inspired with the same devoted determination and energy that inspired the movement at that time. Indeed, no one, we think, has until now doubted that the strength of the present-day movements lies in the awakening of the masses, principally the industrial proletariat, and that its weakness lies in the lack of consciousness and initiativeness among the revolutionary leaders. However, of late, a staggering discovery has been made, which threatens to disestablish all hitherto prevailing views of the question. This discovery was made by, which is the polemic with Iskra and Zohar, did not confine itself to making objections on separate points, but tried to ascribe general disagreements to a more profound cause, the different appraisals of the relative importance of the spontaneous and consciously methodological element. Alright, so let's see. For the reason of reaction is, for this reason, the question of relation between consciousness and spontaneity is of such enormous general interest. The reason the question must be dealt with in great detail. Beginning of spontaneous upsurge. So, in previous chapters, we pointed out how universally absorbed the educated youth of Russia was in the theories of Marxism in the middle of the 90s. In the same period, the struggle The strikes they followed the famous St. Petersburg Industrial War of 1896 assumed a similar general character. The spread over the whole of Russia clearly showed the depth of the newly awakened popular movement. And if we are to speak of the spontaneous element, then of course it is the strike movement which, first and foremost, must be regarded as spontaneous. But there's spontaneity and spontaneity. Strikes occurred in Russia in the 70s and 60s, and even in the first half of the 19th century, and they were accompanied by the spontaneous destruction of machinery. So this, of course, is riots, revolts. Compared with these revolts, the strikes of the 90s might even be described as conscious. To such an extent do they mark the progress which the working class movement made in that period. This shows that the spontaneous element, in essence, represents nothing more nor less than consciousness in an embryonic form. Even the primitive revolts express the awakening of consciousness to a certain extent. The workers were losing their age-long faith in the permanence of the system which oppressed them, and began, I shall not say to understand, but to sense the necessity for collective resistance, definitely abandoning their slavish submission to the authorities. But this was nevertheless more in the nature of outbursts of desperation and vengeance than a struggle. The strikes of the 90s reveal far greater flashes of consciousness. Definite demands were advanced, and the strike was carefully timed. Known cases and instances in other places were discussed, etc. The revolts were simply the resistance of the oppressed, whereas the systematic strikes represented the class struggle in embryo, but only an embryo. Taken by themselves, these strikes were simply trade union struggles, not yet social democratic struggles. They marked the awakening antagonism between worker and employer, but the workers were not and could not be conscious of the irreconcilable antagonism of their interests to the whole of the modern political and social system. Theirs was not yet social democratic consciousness. In this sense, the strikes of the 90s, despite the enormous progress they represented as compared with the revolts, remained a purely spontaneous movement. So this is what's important is that there's this idea right here of social democratic consciousness, but basically socialism consciousness, right? And the idea that if you don't have this consciousness, then you will instead, have the trade unionist consciousness, and the trade unionist consciousness is not necessarily, this like basically the difference would be, as you see above, which is that you have a consciousness of an irreconcilable antagonism of interest, which is not something that the trade unionists necessarily says. They more say, hey, give us more pay, give us more vacation, give us more blah 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 blah, right? Whereas the social democrat says, you know what, you shouldn't be the capitalist. And of course, this you translate this into the African sense, which is, you shouldn't be here, foreigner, or you shouldn't even be here, Askari. See what I'm saying? So I mean, technically, what we want, I think, what we really should have is this Sankofa consciousness, and I think that's going to come through with, really articulating on the spirituality, which is something I've done in the Book of Power, but of course, you can see that in the preview for the Book of Power. But I really think maybe I might have to just do like a pamphlet, make a short study on, essentially, Ma'atism and Amonism actually, and what that necessarily means, because we really should have a spirituality. We really should have a spirituality, and stop the nonsense otherwise, right? So let's keep going. We have said that there could not have been a social democratic consciousness among the workers. It would have been brought to them from without. The history of all countries shows that the working class, exclusively by its own effort, is able to develop only trade union consciousness, the conviction that it is necessary to combine in unions, fight the employers, and strive to compel the government to pass necessary labor legislation, right, etc. The theory of socialism, however, grew out of the philosophic, historical, and economic theories elaborated by educated representatives of the property classes by intellectuals. By their social status, the founders of modern scientific socialism, Marx and Engels, themselves belong to the bourgeois intelligentsia. In the very same way, in Russia, the theoretical doctrine of social democracy arose altogether independently of the spontaneous growth of the working class movement. It arose as a natural and inevitable outcome of the development of those thought among the revolutionary socialist intelligentsia. In the period under discussion, the middle 90s, this doctrine not only represented the complete formulated program of the emancipation of labor group, but it already won over to its side the majority of the revolutionary youth in Russia. Hence, we had both the spontaneous awakening of the working masses, the awakening to conscious life and conscious struggle, and revolutionary youth armed with social democratic theory and straining towards the workers. In this connection, it is particularly important to state the oft-forgotten and comparatively little-known fact that although the earliest social democrats of that period zealously carried on economic agitation, being guided in this activity by a truly useful indication contained in the pamphlet on agitation that then still in manuscript, they did regard this their sole task. On the contrary, in the very beginning, they set for Russian social democracy the most far-reaching historical task in general and the task of overthrowing autocracy in particular. Thus towards the so on and so forth. So I mean, look, I think this is pretty interesting right here because this is actually I really want you to understand this one right here. So he says the history of all countries so that the working class, exclusively by its own effort, is able to only develop trade union consciousness. So, you know, I think this is really important because when we talk about let's say the history of all countries, the slave consciousness. What's the slave consciousness? That idea that you would only develop a conviction that is necessary to get reparations. You know what I mean? Like the idea is that the working class or the people, the masses, do not develop higher levels of consciousness, right? That would be, relegated to the intellectuals, if you will. The intellectuals, and you really have to somehow combine those two. And I think that's actually a pretty critical idea that we're really neglecting. So I think this is actually not that bad a reading. Obviously, it is a terrible reading, but it's not that bad. It's not half bad. It's fully bad, right? No, or it's not full bad. It's half bad, right? All right. The leading article, blah 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 blah. The leading article in this issue outlined the historical task of the working class and placed the achievement of political liberty at the head. The issue also contained an article entitled which dealt with the crushing of the elementary education committee by the people. By the police. In addition, there was some correspondence from St. Petersburg from other parts. Thus, first effort, if we are not mistaken, the Russian Democratic of the 90s was not a purely local or less local, but one that aimed to unite the strike movement with the revolutionary movement against the autocracy and to win over to the side of social democracy all who oppressed by the policy of reactionary obscurantism. To no one in the slightest degree acquainted with the state of the movement, the period, and would have had a wide circulation. The failure of the enterprise merely showed that the social democrats of the period. So I'm thinking to myself, right? I should have pamphlets for every country. I should have pamphlets for every country. How long should a pamphlet be? Because I think there's like a minimum number of. Well, I'm gonna look at what's the. Yeah, I think we should have a pamphlet for every country, and that would make a lot more sense. So the failure of the enterprise merely showed that the social democrats of that period were unable to meet the immediate requirements of the time owing to the lack of revolutionary experience and practical training. This must be said too with regards to the same period. Blah, 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 blah. Of course, he would not. It's a lack of training of the majority of the revolutionaries in the time. Okay, so here it goes. But in order to profit from the experience of that movement, to draw practical lessons from it, we must thoroughly understand the causes and significance of that shortcoming. It is therefore highly important to establish the fact that as part, perhaps even a majority of the social democrats active in the period of 1895-98 justly considered it as possible, even then at the very beginning of the spontaneous movement, to come forward with the most extensive program in a militant tactical line. Lack of training of the majority of the revolutionaries, an entirely natural phenomenon, could not have roused any particular fears. Once the tasks were correctly defined, once the energy existed for repeated attempts to fulfill them, temporary failures represented only part misfortune. Revolutionary experiences and organizational skills are things that can be acquired, provided the desire is there to acquire them, provided the shortcomings are recognized, which in revolutionary activity is more than halfway towards their removal. But what was only part misfortune becomes full misfortune when this consciousness began to grow dim. When there appeared people and even social democratic organs that were prepared to regard shortcomings as virtues, that even tried to invent a theoretical basis for their slavish cringing before spontaneity, in time to draw a conclusion from this trend, the content of which is incorrectly and too narrowly characterized as economism. So, this is actually, I think we have to, so even how I do the worship, I think I'm going to alter the worship again. Because I know you guys like the quotes. Well, actually, I don't know that, but I think we're going to alter the worship again to be even more Pan-African. And you know what? I'm probably going to try to include, the United Snakes and all that. I mean, I don't usually, but might as well. All right, so I'll call them. I mean, who knows? Before dealing with the literary manifestation of the subservience to spontaneity, we should like to note the following characteristic, fact communicated as from the above mentioned, which throws light on the conditions in which the two future conflicting trends in Russian social democracy arose and grew among the comrades working in St. Petersburg. The conversation centered chiefly about the question of organization, particularly about the rules of the workers' mutual benefits fund. The young members defended the main principles of the rules and form which they had published. The old members contended that the prime necessity was not this, but the consolidation of the legal struggle into the organization of revolutions in which all the various revolutionary mutual funds should be subordinated. It goes without saying that the disputing sides far from realized at the time the disagreements were the beginning of a cleavage. On the contrary, they regarded them as something isolated and casual. But this fact shows that the Russia to communism did not arise and spread without a struggle against the old social democrats. And if this struggle has not yet documentary traces behind it, is solely because the membership of the circles thus functioning underwent such constant change that no continuity was established, so on and so forth. The founding of So this is obviously something else. Let's see. Authors stating that the arm of the Blue Coats could never halt the progress of the working class movement. The leading article goes on to say the virility of the working class movement is due to the fact that the workers themselves are at last taking their fate into their own hands and out of the hands of the leaders. This fundamental thesis is then developed in greater detail. Actually, the leaders, the social democrats, the organizers, were, one might say, torn out of the hands of the workers by the police. Yet it is made to appear that the workers are fighting against the leaders and liberating themselves from their yoke. Okay, so he's saying that this is the thing that's going to happen too. That people understand that like leadership is really important. People understand that, and so what the capitalists, I would imagine it's the capitalists. I really didn't catch into it, but let's say that the opposition is going to say, "Oh, the workers fought against the leaders," but really it was the police fighting against the leaders, But instead of sounding the call to go forward towards the consolidation of the revolutionary organization and expansion of political activity, the call was issued for a retreat to a purely trade union struggle. It was announced that the economic basis of the movement is eclipsed by the effort never to forget the political ideals, and that the watchword of the working class movement was struggle for economic conditions, or better still, the workers for the workers. It was declared that strike funds are more valuable to the movement than 100 other organizations with a polemic, and the catchwords like, we must concentrate not on the cream of the workers, but on the average mass worker. So what they did was, politics always obediently follows economics, became the fashion, exercising an irresistible influence upon the mass of the youth who were attracted to the movement, but who in the majority of the cases were acquainted only with such fragments of Marxism as expounded in legally appearing publications. So what the opposition, what the state does, is the state says, you know what, we heard you, we hear you. And that's what you see all over the continent. The state tells you that they hear you, and they elaborate and articulate. They try to elaborate your movement in a way that's palatable for them. So over here, you see that the quote unquote workers are fighting against the state, or that's the idea. That's the idea that the workers are trying to, like, the leadership of the quote unquote socialists or the revolutionaries are trying to go against the state, and the state is saying, oh no, what these workers are really fighting for, but they're telling everybody, is that the workers are really fighting for better wages, and we're going to give them the better wages. You get what I'm saying? And so what it does is that people on the sideline, or people who are not necessarily in the organizations, or the workers who might not necessarily be connected to the leadership, especially after the leadership is arrested, right? What that tells you is that they're going to they're going to move forward with transforming that. So I think this is actually pretty interesting, especially if we're going to try to do something for ourselves. I just got to figure out how many pages. I guess 20 pages might be sufficient. Yeah, 20 pages might be sufficient. All right. So political consciousness. Let me think of another number. Let me think of another number of pages. Let me see. 54. Okay. So political consciousness were completely overwhelmed by spontaneity, the spontaneity of the social democrats who repeated Mr. Vivi's ideas, the spontaneity of these workers who were carried away by the arguments that a kopeck at a ruble was worth more, phrases like blah. So let's see. In the first place, the overwhelming political consciousness by spontaneity to which we referred above also took place spontaneously. This may sound like a pun, but alas, it is the bitter truth. It did not take place as a result of an open struggle between two diametrically opposed points of view in which one triumphed over the other. It occurred because of the fact that the increasing number of old revolutionaries were torn away by the dreams, and the increasing number of young individuals of social appeared on the scene. Everyone who has, I shall not say participated in, but at least breathed the atmosphere of the present-day Russian movement knows perfectly well that this is precisely the case. And if, nevertheless, was insist strongly that the reader be fully clear on these generally known facts, if you cite for explicitness, so on and so forth. So let's see. Secondly, let's just skip through this. Many of our revisionist critics believe that Marx asserted the economic development and the class struggle create not only the conditions of the social production, but also indirectly the consciousness of its necessity. And these critics assert that England, the country's most highly developed capitalist, is more remote than any other from this consciousness. Judging by the draft, one might assume that this allegedly orthodox Marxist view, which is thus refuted, was shared by the committee that drafted the Austrian program. In the draft program, it is stated, the more capitalist development increases the number of proletariat, the more the proletariat is compelled and becomes fit to fight against capitalism. Proletariat becomes consciousness of the ability and the necessity for socialism. In this connection, socialist consciousness appears to be a necessary and direct result of the proletarian class struggle. But this is absolutely untrue. Of course, socialism as a doctrine has its roots in modern economic relations, just as the class struggle of the proletariat has, and like the latter, emerges from the struggle against the capitalist created poverty and misery of the masses. But socialism and the class struggle arises side by side and not one out of the other. Each arises under different conditions. Modern socialist concepts can arise only on the basis of profound scientific knowledge. Indeed, modern economic science is much like a condition for a socialist production, as I say, modern technology. And the proletariat can create neither the one nor the other. No matter how much it may desire to do so, both arise out of the modern socialist process. The vehicle of science is not the proletariat, but the bourgeois intelligentsia. It was in this minds of individual members of the stratum that modern socialism originated, and it was they who communicated to the more intellectually developed proletarian, who, in their turn, introduced it to the proletarian class struggle, conditions allow that to be that. Thus, socialist consciousness is something introduced into the proletarian class struggle from without, and not something that arose within it spontaneously. Accordingly, the old Hanfield program quite rightly stated that the task of social democracy is to view the proletariat, literally saturate the proletariat with the consciousness of its position and the consciousness of its task. There would be no need for this if consciousness arose of itself from the class struggle. The new drafted copied this proposition from the old program and attached it to the proposition mentioned above, but this completely broke the line of thought. So that's actually pretty interesting. I want to see what this, I didn't really see the context was, if I'm mistaken. Some of what has been said already, we shall quote the following profoundly true and important words of, that's Karl Kotsky on the draft program. Okay, so right here it says, this shows that all worship of the spontaneity of the working class movement, all witting of the role of the conscious movement, or the role of social monarchy, means quite independently of whether we Buddha's the roles is or not strengthening the influence of the bourgeois ideology upon the workers. All of these who talk about overrating the importance of ideology, about exaggerating the role of the conscious element, imagine that the labor movement, pure and simple, can elaborate and will elaborate independently ideology for itself if only the workers rest their fate from the hands of the leaders. Okay, so this is pretty much just this idea that, the ideology of independence, I want to say. If we're going to put it into the African context, right? The ideology of the independence doesn't come from the masses of Africans, but will come from the African intellectuals. And so, so it really behooves us to, it means that we have to go about introducing the consciousness of Africa into African people, but we can't expect them to have it on their own. We can't expect the masses of African people to have it on their own, but some of us can introduce it. So it's actually pretty interesting, and it tells you what we could be doing, or at least something that we should explore doing. But right now it's not necessarily. It's not necessarily yeah. Alright. right, so let's see. Since there is no talk of an independent ideology formulated by the working class movement themselves in the process since there can be no talk of an independent ideology formulated by the working masses themselves in the process of their movement, the only choice is either bourgeois or socialist ideology. There is no middle course, for mankind has not created a third ideology, and moreover, in a society torn by class executives, there can never be a non-class or an above-class ideology. So obviously, this is the dogmatism of the socialists. That there's only bourgeois and socialists. Anyway, so hence to belittle the socialist ideology in any way, to turn aside from it the slightest degree, means to strengthen bourgeois ideology. There is much talk of spontaneity, but the spontaneous development of the working class movement leads to the subordination of the bourgeois ideology to its development along the lines of a credo program. For the spontaneous working class movement is trade unionism. Trade unionism means the ideological enslavement of the workers by the bourgeoisie. Hence, the task of social democracy is to combat spontaneity, to divert the working class movement from the spontaneous trade unionist striving to come under the wing of the bourgeoisie, and to bring it under the wing of revolutionary social democracy. The sentence employed by the author of the Economist letter. So that's actually pretty interesting, though. If these authors were capable, so you don't want to go into this dichotomy. White people have this tendency to have this dichotomy thinking. It's you either go for what's his name, Booker T. Washington, or W.B. Du Bois. There's no what's his name, Kelly Walker, I think his name is, or Kelly right, or Kelly something. But there's no him. It's either Du Bois or Marcus Garvey. There's no, whomever else, right? It's either Malcolm X or Martin Luther King Jr. There's no Carlos Cooks. It's either the Black Panther Party or the Democratic Party. There's no Robin Williams. It's either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. You know what I mean? There's no Green Party. It's either the it's either America or Russia. There's no, China. There's no Tanzania. You know what I mean? There's no Ghana. So it's they tend to have this tendency of this dichotomy thinking, this one or the other. So it's so you see, it's there's no middle course. There's no bourgeois. There's no socialist. But again, you want to revisit into what ancient Africans used to think, which is along the lines of Kemet and of ancient Africa in general, and I think that's actually something that's really important that we have to, embody and imbibe, which is that we had our own social formations, we had our own structure, and I mean, I understand this idea of what workers. So it's if you're the working masses, you might have this relationship with the bourgeoisie that's either enslaved to them, subordinated to them, or not subordinated to them in a sense, right? But of course, it's a false dichotomy in the sense that it's a false dichotomy in the sense that you don't have to look at yourself strictly as a worker versus a bourgeoisie, as opposed to you could be a African. You know what I mean? You could be an African as opposed to a Mzungu, and that means something else. So they don't have to worry about that because they're looking at it from a European point of view, but we're not. But we're subjected by Europeans more so, or most so, most so, and not necessarily only European bourgeoisie. You know what I mean? We have the European Christians, we have the European traders, we have the European, everything. All right. So policemen, so on and so forth. And of course, you could say, hey, all this European stuff are beholden to the bourgeoisie, but not really, because the Christians not really beholden to the bourgeoisie, and so on and so forth. If these authors were capable of fearlessly, consistently, blah 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 blah. Let's recall the example of Germany. What was the historic service LaSalle rendered to the German working class movement? It was a diverting the movement from the path of progressionist trade unionism and cooperativism towards what it has spontaneously moving. The fulfill. But see, the thing is that even though they're talking about Germany, you already know what happens to Germany. You know what I mean? Germany goes the way of the Nazis. A fierce struggle against spontaneity was necessary only after such a struggle extending over many years was it possible, for instance, to convert the working population of Germany, Berlin, and bulwark of the progressionist party into one of the finest strongholds of social democracy. This struggle is by no means over, even today. Even now, the German working class is, so to speak, split among a number of ideologies. A section of the workers is organized in Catholic and monarchist trade unions. Another section is organized in the Herrschaft, whatever unions, founded by the bourgeois worshippers of English trade unionism. Third is organized in the social democratic trade unions. The last named group is immeasurably more numerous than the rest. The social democratic ideology was able to achieve this superiority by an unswerving struggle against all ideologies. So we're gonna just skip ahead because this. I feel like we got the lesson of this one. The self-emancipation group. We have dealt at such length with the little known and now almost forgotten leading article in the first issue of Rabbi blah 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 because it was the first and most striking expression of the general stream of thought which expressed the word emerged to the light of day in innumerable streamlets. VI was perfectly right when in praising the first issue and leading article of this book, I guess, he said that the article has been written in a sharp and fervent manner. Every man with conviction who thinks he has something new to say writes fervently and in such a way to make this claim. His views stand out in bold relief. Only those who are accustomed to sitting between the two stools lack. All right, so I want to see this self-emerging group. Yeah. I mean, like I said, if you're interested in this, really, because I can tell not too many people are interested in this. Well, not just because I'm reading this in the middle of the day, and there's no replies, or is only around at max 3 listeners. So, but of course it's in the middle of the day, But anyway, also because it's it's white stuff, right? It's like white boy stuff. I mean, it's semi interesting, but it's really white boy stuff. But I'm skipping through it. Obviously, if you really wanted to see, if you were like a historical buff, you could look into this, but I'm not really that kind of person anymore. We consider the most important phenomenon of Russian life, the one will mainly determine the task. It may be interpreted in one of two ways. Either it means bowing to the spontaneity movement, using the as such. So yeah, I mean, the task ahead for me, I think I really should be about writing some African revolutionary literature and stressing the need for us as a continental people, and really using that on a global level, just to double check myself. Like I have this article. I have this thing called the Progress of the Race, and I think that's really what we should. I'm just gonna double check to make sure that it has 54 or whatever, 54 countries. I can't really tell. I'm looking at this, but if it has 54 countries, what that means is that, So it has 52 countries, so that's good. But let me just make sure. I think that's actually how many weeks in a year. I can't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, 52. So that's good. So 52 is actually a perfect number. I don't know why I'm saying 54, but 52 is a perfect number. And because it's a perfect number, what that means is that we can have a description for every week and about revolution and about each country. But alright, so social democracy does not tie its hands, it does not restrict its activities to someone preconceived plan or method of political struggle. It recognizes all means of struggle as long as they correspond to the forces at the disposal of the party. Without a strong organization skilled in waging political struggle, under all circumstances and all times, there can be no question of a systematic plan of action illumined by firm principles and steadfastly carried out, which alone is worthy of the name of tactics. So let's see, diametric contradiction. So this is a quote from somebody. Social democracy does not tie its hands, it does not restrict its activities to some one preconceived plan or method of political struggle. It recognizes all means of struggle as long as they correspond to the forces at the disposal of the party. Okay, without a strong organizational skill, skilled in waging political struggle under all circumstances at all times, there will be no question of what systematically plan of action, illumined by firm principles and steadfastly carried out, which alone is worthy of the name of tactics. So the confound principles. Basically, somebody wrote some treatise on revolution and on political struggle in a sense, and Lenin is just praising it, right? So tactics plans contradicts the essence of Marxism. This is slander of Marxism. It means turning Marxism into a caricature held by the America in their struggle against us. It means belittling the initiative and energy of the class consciousness fighter. Like Marxism, on the contrary, gives a gigantic impetus to the initiative and energy of the socialist Democrats. Opens up for him the widest perspective. So yeah, I'm thinking I'm gonna like I really want to do this other writing. I'm being a little motivated because these crackers shouldn't be outdoing us. Okay. These crackers shouldn't be outdoing us. So I'm going to ask people, to come through. I'm thinking there's going to be some day that you can come through. I want you to come through, and we're going to discuss at length, how to transform our situation, or how to reach every nation on this planet, every African nation, every African population. So the task of revolutionary social democrat is only to accelerate objective development by his conscious work, not to obviate it or substitute his own subjective plans for this development. Iksra knows all this in theory, but the enormous importance which Marxism justly attaches to consciousness and revolutionary work causes it in practice, owing it to the doctrinaire view of tactics, but little is significant to the object of the spontaneous. All right. Yeah, so again, this is all very interesting. We're just gonna jump through it though, because I want to get further and farther. I want to get further and farther. We're gonna get to it. So we're at chapter 3: trade unionist politics and social democratic politics. So this is the difference between the trade unionist politics and the social democratic politics. So he formulated the differences as follows: literature exposure and proletarian. We cannot confine ourselves solely to exposing the system that stands in its path of development. We must also react to the immediate and current interests of the proletariat. It is in fact an organ of revolutionary opposition that exposes the state of affairs in our country, particularly the political state of affairs. We, however, work and shall continue to work for the cause of the working class in close organic contact with the proletarian struggle. One cannot help being grateful to Marxism for this formula. It is of outstanding general interest because substantially it embraces not only our disagreement with but the general disagreement between ourselves and the economists of the political experiment. We have shown that economists do not altogether repudiate politics, but they are constantly straying from the social democratic to the trade unionist conception of politics. Strays in precisely this way, and we shall therefore take his view as a mild economist error on this question. We shall endeavor to prove that of the authors of the separate. Everyone knows that the economic struggle of the Russian workers underwent widespread development and consolidation with the production of literature, exposing economic. Oh, sorry. Alright, this exposure, I was started reading, I'm like, remember, is this even interesting? The exposure literature created a tremendous sensation, not only in the particular factory exposed in the given leaflet, but in all the factories to which news of the revealed facts spread. So we're going to keep going. On more than one occasion, the mere appearance of a leaflet proved sufficient to secure the satisfaction of all other parties' demand. So yeah, like leaflets and that kind of stuff. Like we just have to try to understand what a leaflet is, right? So the overwhelming majority of Russian social democrats have of late been almost entirely absorbed by the work of organizing the exposure of factory conditions. Suffice it to recall. Oh yeah, so the thing is that white people have is they have it easy, right? What they're doing is they go to a factory or they see what the factory is doing, right? And they say, look, these conditions are appalling. There, blah blah blah. Let's revolt. Let's go against this. You can revolt. You can go against this. If we as a people, we as a white people get together and blah blah blah, we can have these factories can be beneficial. Blah 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 blah. Right? But it's different for us as a people because we you go to Angola, right? And you're dealing with a people with a historical legacy, different, than the people in Namibia, or people with a spiritual background different. And of course, on the core of it, on the core of it, you can tie in together. But as for transforming Africa into, as for appealing to one group of Africans, in some sense, we have to come up with a way to formulate and formalize this Pan-African struggle and really come to understand it. So it's really important that we do have this quote unquote Pan-African Congress. It's really important that we do have this Pan-African Congress. So if need be, if need be, it may have to be organized. And I mean, not to spill the beans, but I think that's going to be something that may well happen. Fortune merely dealt with the relations between the workers in a given trade and their employers, but they could also have led. You must take up actively the political education of the working class and development of its political consciousness. All right, so this is what we can get from this. Hence, it follows that not only must social democrats not confine themselves exclusively to the economic struggle, but they must have the organization of economic exposures to become the predominant part of the activity. The organization of economic exposures to become the predominant part of their activity. So, say it differently. We have to, as Africans, Sankofa, allow for the organization of Wazungu exposures. But that's what I'm saying. I don't even want Wazungu exposures. I want Pan-African exposures. You see what I'm saying? But that's the thing too. It's like it's threefold. Okay? It's threefold. One, you want the interconnectedness. Two, you want the good works being done. And three, you want the bad things being done against them. Four. I mean, there's a lot to it, but this is gonna be a really good breakdown. I'm gonna have to start taking some notes, to be honest. And I've not notes on this writing because I don't really care for this writing, but what I'm saying, what I'm thinking right now, because I wanna connect with us as a people, and I think this is actually something that we could do. Let me just try to open up these the notes in this book. Hold on a second. One of my troubles is that while I want to write a pamphlet, I also feel like even if I do write a pamphlet, I can't read it too often because you've already heard it. You know what I mean? If I read it once, you've already heard it a million times. You know what I mean? So it's like if I did the weekly one, right? Then at least it's complicated. But once upon a time, to be honest with you, one of the first things I wrote was a Pan-African article. Actually, a couple of times. You know what? I'm gonna review. I'm gonna review the older literature that I wrote, because a lot of the literature I wrote when I was younger really was, on par, and that's really what it's about. So the question is, what should political education consist in? It can be confined to the propaganda of working class hostility to the autocracy? Of course not. It is not enough to explain to the workers that they are politically oppressed, any more than it is to explain to them that their interests are antagonistic to the interests of the employers. Agitation must be conducted with regard to every concrete example of this oppression. Agitation must be conducted with regard to every concrete example of oppression, as we have begun to carry out agitation around concrete examples of economic oppression. Inasmuch as this oppression affects the most diverse classes of society, inasmuch as it manifests itself in the most varied spheres of life, it is not evident that we shall not be fulfilling our task of developing the political consciousness. We do not undertake the organization of the political exposure of autocracy in all its aspects. In order to carry an agitation around concrete instances of the oppression, these instances must be exposed, as it is necessary to expose factory abuses in order to carry on economic agitation. One must think this is clear enough. It turns out, however, that it is only in words that all are agreed on the need to develop political consciousness as all its aspects. It turns out that, for example, far from tackling the task of organizing or making, I'll try to pronounce this, Robochea Dielo, For example, far from tackling the task of organizing or making a start in organizing comprehensive political exposures, to even trying to drag Iskra, which has undertaken this task, away from it. Listen to the following. The political struggle of the working class is certainly not merely, the most developed, wide, and effective form of economic struggle. The Social Democrats are now confronted with the task of lending the economic struggle itself, as far as possible, a political character. Economic struggle is the most widely applicable means of drawing the masses into the active political struggle. And so on and so forth. Okay, so he's kind of just criticizing this platform, if you will, and that's fine, but it's the very opposite is true. Okay, so he says the very opposite is true. So economic struggle represent in general less widely applicable means and occasions for political agitation for drawing the masses into the political struggle. Then masses begins to understand immediate political demands after one strike of all events after several. As soon as the government sets the police and gerrymanders against them. This opportunist theory of state has now been rejected by the Union abroad, which makes the concession by declaring there is no need whatever to conduct political agitation right from the beginning, mostly on an economic basis. So let's see. Contain, blah blah blah. What concrete really means attached to the economic struggles and the collective struggles of the workers against their employers for better terms and sales of the labor power for better living and working condition. So we're going to skip through this because it doesn't seem like he's really saying anything. Revolutionary social democracy has always included the struggle for reforms as a part of activity, but it utilizes economic agitation for the purpose of representing to the government not only demands for all sorts of measures, but also and primarily the demand that it ceases to be an autocratic government. Moreover, it considers it a duty to present this demand to the government on the basis not of the economic struggle alone, but of all manifestations in general of public and political life. In a world that subordinates the struggle for reform as a part of the world, the revolutionary struggle for freedom and for socialism, however, resuscitates the theory of stages in a new form. So, marching on. How one-sided the car would be. So we're going to skip through this. How Marjanov rendered much water has flowed on the bridge since. Let's see. We congratulate Russian international secretary has found. Yeah. Let's see. Astonishes the programs by revolutionary, such as the constant stress upon the benefit of workers' activities in parliament, non-existent in Russia, though they completely ignore, thanks to their revolutionary nihilism, the importance of workers' participation in legislative manufacturers, assemblies on factory affairs, which do exist in Russia, or at least the importance of workers' participation in the municipal bodies. Oh, I see. Yeah, so they're saying, they're like, why do you like voting, but you don't like to have workers actually have autonomy? But again, like I see workers, like workers are not a real, like they're not a real political group. They're a political group among white people. They're not really a real political group among black people. So, like, I mean, it's not like the real concern among black people in the same sense, I mean, the thing with white people is that what they don't realize is that white people naturally don't like white people. White people are naturally distrusting of other people and naturally dislike other people. So it's really behooves us to like go on to that. But let's say political exposure and training in revolutionary activity. So this is actually probably might be important. So in advancing against Iskra, his theory of raising the activity of the working masses Martinov actually betrayed the urge to belittle activity, for he declared the very economic struggle before which all economists gravel to the preferable, particularly important, and most widely applicable means of rousing this activity in its broadest field. This error is characteristic precisely that it is by no means peculiar to Martinov. In reality, it is possible to raise the activity of the working masses only when the activity is not restricted to political agitation on the economic basis. What is the condition for the necessary expansion of political agitation is the organization of comprehensive political exposure. In no way except by means of such exposure can the masses be trained in political consciousness and revolutionary activity. Hence, activity of this kind is one of the most important functions of the international social democracy as a whole. For even political freedom does not in any way eliminate exposure. It merely shifts somewhat their sphere of direction. Thus, the German party is especially strengthening its position and spreading its influence, thanks particularly to the untiring energy in which it is conducting its campaign of political exposure. Working class consciousness cannot be generally political consciousness unless the workers are trained to respond to all cases of tyranny, oppression, violence, and abuse, no matter what class is affected, unless they are trained, moreover, to respond from a social democratic point of view and no other. The consciousness of the working class movement cannot be, or the working movement, masses, cannot be generally class consciousness unless the workers learn from concrete and above all from topical political facts and events that observe every other social class in all the manifestations of its intellectual, ethical, and political life, unless they learn to apply and practice the materialist analysis and the materialist estimates of all aspects of the life and activity of all classes, strata, and groups of population. Those who concentrate the attention, observation, and consciousness of the working class exclusively, or even mainly upon itself alone, are not social democrats, for the self-knowledge of the working class is indissolubly bound up, not solely with the fully clear theoretical understanding, or rather, not so much with the theoretical as with the practical understanding of the relationships between all the varying classes of modern society acquired through the experience of the political life. For this reason, the conception of the economic struggle as the most widely applicable means of drawing the masses into the political movement, which our economists preach, is so extremely harmful and reactionary in its practical significance. In order to become a social democrat, the worker must have a clear picture in his mind of the economic nature and the social and political features of the landlord and the priest, the high state official and the peasant, the student and the vagabond. He must know their strong and weak points. He must grasp the meaning of all the catchwords and sophisms by which each class and each stratum camouflages its selfish strivings and its real inner workings. He must understand what interests are reflected by certain institutions and certain laws and how they are reflected, but this clear picture cannot be obtained from any book. It can be obtained only from living examples of the exposure that follows close upon what is going about us at a given moment, upon what is being discussed in whispers perhaps by each other in its own way, upon which finds expression in such and such events, in such and such statistics, and in such and such court sentences, etc. These comprehensive political exposures are an essential and fundamental condition for training the masses in revolutionary activity. This is actually not a bad paragraph. Okay? This is actually not a bad paragraph. So, what this is saying is this, that, you can't simply go, it's not working class consciousness, right? You can't simply, you can't simply make a revolutionary consciousness by giving people, say, hey, you're a worker, and this is what workers are going through, and this is how workers are, so on and so forth. But instead, you want to educate the masses, or you want to educate this worker on every social class and all manifestations of their intellectual, ethical, and political life. Okay? And so, he continually stresses, look, just the self-knowledge for the working class is not enough. And this is what you kind of see, this is why I keep going back to my idea of the 52 countries. The 52 countries of Africa, and what that means for us. What that means for us to study in that sense. And why we would study these 52 countries. Because my only thinking is, how can I make this an interesting pamphlet? How can I make this an interesting pamphlet? But the reason why you would do these 52 countries is because you don't want to end up with what you have like in different areas of Africa where you're only focusing on your one nation and you don't really know what's going on in another nation. So like I said, there are some people who might know quite a bit about, let's say, the American civil rights struggle, but nothing about Nigeria, right? Or they might know something about the End SARS campaign, but nothing about Cameroon and Ambazania, right? Or just going on and on about that. So what you'd want to do is if you're talking about real Pan-African struggle, you're talking about really getting Pan-Africans all over. Like, you want Pan-Africans to be informed on Pan-Africanism, period. And that's really like what I was trying to stress and get to, but it's still a little bit more complicated because you have to be present day. You have to be present day, and that's really difficult to do when you're writing for the future, or you're writing based off the past, but you're not necessarily writing based off of what's really presently going on, because that rock the boat mentality might be a little bit on the other on an extreme in a sense. But yeah, this is actually not a bad paragraph. It's actually pretty good. Why do the Russian workers still manifest little revolutionary activity in response to the brutal treatment of the people by the police, the persecution of religious sects, and you see how they say the brutal treatment of the people by the police? You understand? The brutal treatment of the people by the police. When you talk about, we have police brutality, right? When you talk about, we have police brutality, meanwhile the Russian worker is going through police brutality as well, right? But you're not getting that, right? Anyway, the persecution of religious sects, the flogging of peasants, the outrageous censorship, the torture of soldiers, the persecution of the most innocent cultural undertakings, is it because the economic struggle does not stimulate them to this, because such activities does not promise palpable results, because it produces little that is positive. To adopt such an opinion, we repeat, is merely to direct the charge where it does not belong, to blame the working masses for one's own. I don't know what it is. We must blame ourselves, our lagging behind the mass movement, for still being unable to organize sufficiently wide, striking, and rapid exposure of all the shameful outrages. When we do that, and we must and can do it, the most backward worker will understand and will feel that the students in religious sects, the peasants and the authors, are being abused and outraged by the same dark forces that are oppressing and crushing them in every step of his life. Feeling that he himself will be filled with an irresistible desire to react, and he will know how to hoot the censors one day, on another day to demonstrate outside the house of a governor who has brutally suppressed a peasant uprising, on still another day to teach a lesson to the Jordanes and suppliers who are doing the work of the Holy Inquisition, etc. As we have done very little, almost nothing, to bring before the working masses prompt exposure of all possible issues, many of us as yet do not recognize that is our bounden duty, but trail spontaneously in the wake of the drab, everyday struggle in the narrowly confines of the factory life. Under such circumstances, to say that Iskra displays a tendency to minimize the significance of the forward march of the drab everyday. Alright, so as for calling the masses to action, there will come of itself as soon as the energetic political agitation, live, and striking exposure come into play, to catch some criminal red-handed and immediately to brand him publicly in all places itself far more effectively than any part of calls, the effective, very often impossible, blah, blah, blah. A word in passing about the call to action. The only newspaper which, prior to the spring events, called upon the workers to intervene actively in the matter, that certainly did not promise any palpable results whatever for the workers, the drafting of the students into the army, was Iskra. Immediately after the publication of the order of students drafting the 183 students army, blah, blah, demonstration was begun. Forthwith called upon the workers to go to the aid of the students, called upon the people openly to take up the government's arrogant challenge. We ask how the remarkable fact to be explained that although Markov talks so much about the calls to action and even suggests calls to action as a special form of activity, he said not a word about this call. After this, was it not shared, blah, blah, blah. So he's just talking about some sort of history of this. Let's see, I think we're actually not even too far, because it's actually taking quite a bit of time. So, what is common between economism and terrorism? What is there in common between economism and terrorism? Last but not least, we cite the opinion of economists and of non-social democratic terrorists. We show themselves to be accidentally in agreement. Speaking generally, however, there is not an accidental nor necessary inherent connection between the two, of which we have a need to speak later. First sight, our drab may appear paradoxical. From this point of view, it becomes clear why, unable to withstand the spontaneity of economism, is likewise unable to withstand the spontaneity of terrorism. It is highly interesting that there's a specific argument that advance of terrorism. Yeah, okay. So we're just gonna go for it. Word class is vanguard fighter for democracy. So again, we wanted to really know about vanguard, so we're going to see that. So we have seen that the conduct of the broadest political agitation and consequently of all sided political exposures is an absolute necessary and a paramount task of our activity if his activity to be truly socially democratic. However, we arrived at this conclusion solely on the grounds of the pressing needs of the working class for political knowledge and political training. But such a presentation of the question is too narrow, for it ignores the general democratic task of social democracy, particularly of present-day Russian social democracy. In order to explain the point more concretely, we shall approach the subject from an aspect that is nearest to the economist, namely from the practical aspect. Everyone agrees that it is necessary to develop the political consciousness of the working class. The question is how that is to be done and what is required to do it. The economic struggle merely impels the worker to realize the government's attitude towards the working class. Consequently, however, much we may try to lend the economic struggle itself a political character, we shall never be able to develop the political consciousness of the workers to the level of social democratic political consciousness by keeping within the framework of the economic struggle, for that framework is too narrow. The Martinov formula has some value for us, not because it illustrates Martinov's attitude for confusing things, but because it pointedly expresses the basic error that all the economists commit, namely the conviction that it is possible to develop the class political consciousness of the workers from within, so to speak, from the economic struggle. By making this struggle the exclusive starting point, making exclusive such a view is radically wrong. Peace by our polemics against the class political consciousness can be brought to the workers only from without, that is, only from outside the economic struggle, from outside the spheres of relations between workers and employers. The spheres from which alone it is possible to obtain this knowledge is to the spheres of relationship of all classes scattered to the state and the government, and the spheres of the interrelation between all classes. For that reason, the reply to the question as to what must be done to bring political knowledge to the workers cannot be merely answered with which the majority of cases the practical workers, especially those inclined towards economism, mostly content themselves, namely, to go among the workers, to bring political knowledge to the workers. The social democrats must go among all classes of the population, as much units of their army in all directions, right? We deliberately cite this blunt formula, we deliberately express ourselves in the sharply simplified manner, not because we desire to indulge in paradoxes, but in order to impel the economists to a realization of their task which they unpardonably ignore. Suggest to them strongly the difference between the trade unionists and social democratic politics, which they refuse to understand. We therefore beg the reader not to go wrong, but to hear us patently to the end. Let us take the type of social democratic study circle that has become most widespread in the past few years and examine its work. It has contacts with the workers and rests content with this, issuing leaflets in which abuses in the factories, the government's partiality towards the capitalists, and the tyranny of the police are strongly condemned. At workers' meetings, the discussion never or rarely ever go beyond the limits of their subjects. Extremely rare are the lectures and discussions held onto the history of the revolutionary movement on questions. So look at that. Extremely rare are the lectures and discussion held on the history of the revolutionary movement, on questions of the government's home and foreign policy, on questions of the economic evolution of Russia and Europe, on the position of the various classes of modern society. As to systematically acquiring and extending contact with other classes of society, no one ever dreams of that. In fact, the ideal leader, as the majority of the members of such circles picture him, is something far more in the nature of a trade union secretary than a socialist political leader. For the secretary of any, said English trade unionist, always helps the workers to carry on the economic struggle. He helps them to expose factory abuses, explains the injustice of the laws and measures that hamper the freedom to strike and to picket. Basically, explains the injustice of the law that of measures that hamper the freedom to strike and to picket. Explains the partiality of arbitration court judges who belong to the bourgeoisie classes. In a word, every trade union secretary conducts and helps to conduct It cannot be too strongly maintained that this is not social democracy, that the social democrats' ideal should not be the trade union secretary, but the tribune of the people, who is able to react to every manifestation of tyranny and oppression, no matter where it appears, no matter what strata or class of the people it affects, who is able to generalize all these manifestations and produce a single picture of police violence and capitalist exploitation, who is able to take advantage of every event, however small, in order to set forth before all his socialist convictions and the democratic demands, in order to clarify for all and everyone the world historic significance of the struggle for the emancipation of the proletariat. Compare, for example, a leader like Robert Knight, so he's going to go into the history of these people. Robert Knight formulated the immediate demands of the proletariat, indicated the means by which they can be achieved, whereas William, while doing this, did not hold back from simultaneously guiding the activities of various opposition strata, dictating a positive program for action for them. that Robert Knight strove as far as possible to lend the economic struggle into a political character, as was excellently able to submit to the government's concrete demand promising certain powerful results, whereas Liebkreuz engaged to a much greater degree in one-sided exposure. That Robert Knight attached more significance to the forward march of the drab everyday struggle, whereas this guy attached more significance to the propaganda of brilliant and competing ideas. Converted the paper he was directing into an organ of revolutionary position that exposed the state of affairs in our country, particularly to the political state of affairs insofar as it affected the interests of the most varied strata of the population. That Robert Knight worked for the cause of the working class in close organic connection with the proletarian struggle. If by close and organic connection is meant the subsurface to spontaneity which we examined above, by taking the example of Khrushchev and Martinev and restricting the spheres of influence, convinced, of course, as Martinev, that by doing so he deepened that influence. In a word, you will see that de facto Martinev reduces social democracy to the level of trade unionism, though he does so, of course, not because he does not desire the good, but simply because he is too much in a hurry to render Planter more profound instead of taking the trouble to understand him. So, yeah, these names are like hard names. But like, yeah, the idea there was that, and that's again too. It's like, you know, there's multiple ways to go about trying something, you know, and there are pitfalls when you try to engage in those kind of things. There are pitfalls. So one of them, obviously, Robert Knight was trying to be diplomatic and ended up being, you know, consumed by the struggle at hand. Whereas this one, Leibniz, tried to be like, you know, try to take control of the situation, and that's really like what we have to, as an African people, consider, you know, as we really move forward with what we're trying to do. Oh, peace, bit of medicine. How you doing? Didn't even know he was in here. All right. Let us return, however, to our thesis. We said that a intelligent Democrat, if he really believes it necessary to develop comprehensively the political consciousness of the proletariat, must go among all classes of the population. This gives rise to the question, how is this to be done? Have we enough forces to do this? Is there a basis for such work among all the other classes? Will it not mean a retreat or lead to a retreat from the class point of view? Let us deal with these questions. So, we must go among all the classes of the population as theoreticians, as propagandists, as agitators, and as organizers. No one doubts that the theoretical work of social democrats should aim at studying all the specific features of the social and political conditions of these various classes, but extremely little is to be done in this direction as compared with the work that is done in studying these specific features of factory life. In the committees and study circles, one can meet people who are immersed in the study, even of some special branch of the metal industry. One can hardly ever find members of organizations, obliged as often happens for some reason or for other practical work, who are especially engaged in gathering material of some pressing question of social and political life in our country, which could serve the means for conducting social democratic work among other strata of the population. And dwelling upon the fact that the majority of the present-day leaders of the working class movement lack training, we cannot refrain from mentioning training in this respect also, but it's too bound up with the economic concept of close organic connection in the proletarian struggle. The principal thing, of course, is propaganda and agitation among all strata of the people. The work of the West European social democrats in this respect is facilitated by the public meetings and rallies which all are free to attend. And by the fact that this parliament addresses the representatives of all classes, we have neither a parliament nor freedom of assembly. Nevertheless, we are able to arrange meetings of workers who desire to listen to a social democrat. We must also find ways or means of calling meetings of representatives of all social classes that desire to listen to a democrat. For he is no social democrat who forgets the practice that the communists support every revolutionary movement, that we are obliged for the reason to expound and emphasize general democratic tasks before the whole people, without for a moment concealing our socialist conviction. He is no social democrat who forgets in practice our occasion to, ahead of all, in raising, insinuating, and solving every general democratic question. But everyone agrees with this, the impatient reader will exclaim, and the new instruction adopted by the last conference of the Union abroad for the editorial board of Vachier Biello definitely say all events of social and political life that affect the proletariat, either directly as a special class or as the vanguard of all the revolutionary forces in the struggle for freedom, should serve as a subject for political propaganda and agitation. Yet there are very true and very good words and we should be fully satisfied in this, understood them, as it was refrained from saying in the next breath that contradicts them. For it is not enough to call ourselves the vanguard, the advanced contingent. We must act in such a way that all the other contingents recognize and are obliged to admit that we are marching in the vanguard. And we ask the reader, are the representatives of the other contingents such fools as to take our word for it when we say that we are the vanguard? Just picture to yourself the following. A social democrat comes to the contingent of Russian educated radicals or liberal constitutionalists and says, we are the vanguard. The task confronting us now is, as far as possible, to lend the economic struggle itself a political character. The radical or constitutionalist, if he is at all intelligent, and there are many intelligent men among Russian radicals and constitutionalists, would only smile in such a speech and would say to himself, of course, for the majority of cases he is an experienced diplomat. Your vanguard must be made up of simpletons. They do not even understand that this is our task. The task of the progressive representative of bourgeois democracy to lend the workers' economic struggle itself a political. The workers' economic struggle itself a political character. Why we too, like the Western European bourgeois, want to draw the workers into politics, but only into trade unionists, not into social democratic politics. Trade unionist politics of the working class is precisely bourgeois politics of the working class, and this vanguard formulation of its task is the formulation of trade unionist politics. Let them call themselves social democrats to their heart's content. I am not a child to get excited over a label, but they must not fall under the influence of those pernicious orthodox doctrinaires. Let them allow freedom of criticism to those who unconsciously are striving to infringe Americans into the trade unionist channel. So he's kind of making fun of something a little complicated. It's not complicated. It's just, whatever. He's making fun of the. I'm trying to figure out this vanguard theory, and I guess he's making fun of these people who would make fun of people who say they're vanguards. So anyway, and the faint smile of the constitutionalists will turn into a Homeric laughter when he learns that the social democrats who talk of social democracy as the vanguard today, when spontaneity almost completely dominates our movement, fear nothing so much as belittling spontaneous element, as underestimating the significance of the forward movement of the drab everyday struggle, as compared with the propaganda of brilliant and completed ideas. A vanguard which fears the consciousness will outstrip spontaneity, which fears to put forward a bold plan that would compel general recognition even among those who differ with us. Are they not confusing vanguard with rearguard? Okay, true. Page 40, so let's skip through. Oh no, see, it's what's the point vanguard? So, let's see, the point we are discussing was a possible and necessary participation of various social strata to overthrow the autocracy. And not only are we able, but is it our bounden duty to guide these activities of various opposition strata if we desire to be the vanguard? Not only will our students and liberals themselves take care of the struggle that brings them face to face with our political regime, the police and the officials of the autocratic government will see this first and foremost. But if we desire to be front-rank Democrats, we must make it our concern to direct the thoughts of those who are dissatisfied only with conditions in the university or on the Zemstvo to the idea that the entire political system is worthless. We must take upon ourselves the task of organizing an all-round political struggle under the leadership of our party in such a manner as to make it possible for all oppositional strata to render their fullest support to the struggle and to our party. We must train our social democratic political workers to become political leaders, able to guide all the manifestations of all-round struggle, able to right time dictate a positive program of action for the aroused students, the discontented Zemstvo, the incensed religious sects. Yeah. So, basically, okay, so by saying that Martin shows that the absolute fails to understand the role of the revolutionary vanguard must really play. If the reader bears this in mind, it must be clear that the real meaning of including remarks, Ishka is the organ of revolutionary opposition which exposes the state of affairs in our country, the political state of affairs as requires that affects the interests of the most varied strata of the population. We have to work and will continue to work for the cause of the working class in close organic contact with the proletarian struggle by restricting the spheres of our active influence we deeply influence. So, to proceed, however, we want to focus. Okay. Entirely lack the opportunity of going among the workers, so that there is no ground for fearing that we shall divert forces from our main work in order to be able to provide the real comfort. Okay. Is there a basis for activity among all classes of the population? Whoever doubts this lags in the consciousness behind the spontaneous awakening of the work. So, basically, you want to show that it's the political organization itself that's failing you, right? That's really the objective, and you want to show how every class in society is failing by that. The political organization fails every class in society. Obviously, with the exception of the bourgeoisie, and in the case of capitalism, but this is really one of the imperative messages of this of our radicalism. It's this idea that the political organization fear every African, you know, exception being I mean, for me, I would say the exception being the Askari, you know, the exception being the Askari. But anyway, so is there a basis for activity among all classes of the population? Whoever doubts this lags in his consciousness behind the spontaneous awakening of the masses. The working class movement has aroused and is continuing to arouse a discontent in some hopes of support for the opposition in order the single social democratic class. So we must arouse in every section of the population, that is all political consciousness, a passion for political exposure. I wrote in my where to begin. All right. Oh yeah, sorry. Actually, once aroused in every section of the all politically conscious, a passion for political exposure. Greater. We must not be discouraged by the fact that the voice of political exposure is today so feeble, timid, and frequent. It is not because of the wholesale submission to police despotism, but because those who are able and ready to make exposure have no tribune from which to speak, no eager and encouraging audience. They do not see anywhere among the people that force to which it would be worth while directing their complaint against the omnipotent Russian government. We are now in a position to provide a tribune to the nationwide exposure of the Tsarist government. In our duty, the tribune must be a social democratic newspaper. So the ideal audience for the political exposure of the working class, which is first and foremost in need of all-round and wide political knowledge, is most capable of converting this knowledge into an active struggle, even when the struggle does not promise palpable results. Our tribune for nationwide exposure can only be an all-Russian newspaper. Without a political organ, a political movement deserving the name is conceivable in the Europe of today. In its respect, Russia must undoubtedly be included in the present-day Europe. The press long ago became a power in our country, otherwise the government would not spend tens of thousands of rubles to bribe it and to subsidize the so on and so forth. So the press became a power in our country. Otherwise, the government would not, try to subdue it, try to bribe it, all that stuff, subsidize, so on and so forth. It is no novelty in autocratic Russia for the underground press to break through the walls of censorship and compel the legal and conservative press to speak openly of it. This was the case in the 70s and even the 50s. How much broader and deeper are now the sections of the people willing to read the illegal underground press and learn from it how to live and how to die, to use the expression. So in our time, a party will organize really nationwide exposure can become the vanguard of the result. Nationwide has a very profound meaning. The overwhelming majority of the non-working class exposers have remembered in order to become the vanguard they must attract other classes are sober politicians and level-headed men of affairs. They know perfectly well how dangerous it is to complain even against a minor official, let alone against the omnipotent Russian government, and they will come to us with a complaint only when they see that their complaints can really have effect and they represent a political force. In order to become such a force in the eyes of outsiders, much persistent and stubborn work is required to raise our own consciousness, initiative, and energy. And this is not enough to attach a vanguard label to rearguard theory and practice. But if he wants to take the organization of the really nationwide exposure of the government, the class character of the movement will be expressed. So I feel like he's getting to the newspaper part, right? So let's see. But if he wants to take the organization of a really nationwide exposure of the government, and what will the class character of our movement be expressed? The overzealous advocate of the close organic contact with the proletarian struggle will ask us, as indeed he does. The reply is manifold. We Social Democrats will organize these nationwide exposures. All questions raised by the agitation will be explained in a consistently social democratic spirit, without any concessions to deliberate or undeliberate distortions of Marxism. All-round political agitation will be conducted by a party which unites into one inseparable whole, the assault of the government in the name of the entire people, the revolutionary training of the proletariat, and the safeguarding of its political independence, the guidance of the economic struggle of the working class, and the utilization of all its spontaneous conflicts with exploiters, which rouse and bring into our camp increasing numbers of proletariat. Right? Oh, sorry, I thought it was going to be the end of the paragraph. So let's see. Request, blah, 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 blah. Hold on a second, give me 2 seconds. Alright, 1, 2. Alright. Yeah, in other articles, blah, 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 blah. So this is pretty interesting. Let's move forward. One more slanderer, one more mysteries. So this is not too interesting. Let's just let's just skip ahead because it's kind of a long reading. It's more like something you would read if you really enjoy this stuff. The reason lies in the fact that we failed to cope with our task. No. Thus, this then is the resolution of the contradiction as it passes. Mummery. That's it. Alright, let's go. What's next? The primitiveness of the economists and their organization are revolutionaries. So let's just read the first paragraph, I guess, which we analyze that the economic struggle is the most widely applicable means of political agitation, and that our task now is to lend the economic struggle itself a political character, especially a narrow view, not only of our political, but also of our organizational tasks. The economic struggle against the employers of the government does not at all require an all-Russia centralized organization, and hence the struggle can never give rise to such an organization as will combine in one general assault all the manifestations of political opposition, protest, and indignation. An organization that will consist of professional revolutionaries can be led by the real political leaders of the entire people. This stands to reason. The character of any organization is naturally and inevitably determined by the content of its activity. Consequently, by the assertion analyzed above, sanctifies and legitimizes not only narrowness of political activity, but also of organizational work. In this case, always put yourself an organ whose consciousness yields to spontaneity, yet subservience to spontaneous the developing forms of organization, failure to realize the narrowness and primitiveness of our organizational work, of our handicraft method in this most important sphere. Failure to realize this, I say, is a veritable ailment from which our movement suffers. It is not an ailment that comes with a decline, but one, of course, that comes with growth. It is, however, at the present time, when the wave of spontaneous indignation, as it were, is sweeping over us, leading and organizers of the movement, that an irreconcilable struggle must be waged against all defensive backwardness, against any legitimation of narrowness in this matter. It is particularly necessary to arouse in all who participate we shall try to answer this question by giving a brief description of the activity of a typical social democratic studies circle of the period 1894 to 1901. We noted that the entire student youth of the period was absorbed in Marxism. Of course, these students were not only, or even not so much interested in Marxism as a theory, they were interested in it as an answer to the question, what is to be done, as a call to take the field against the enemy. These new warriors marched to battle with astonishing primitive equipment and training. In a vast number of cases, they had almost no equipment and obviously no training. They marched to war like peasants from the plow, armed with only clubs. A student circle establishes contact with workers and sets to work without any connection with the old members of the movement, without any connection with study circles in other districts, or even in other parts of the same city, without any organization of the various divisions of revolutionary work, without any systematic plan of activity covering any length of time. The circle gradually expands its propaganda and agitation by its activities with and wins the sympathies of fairly large sections of workers and of certain sections of the educated strata, which provides it with money, and from among whom the committee recruits new groups of young people. The attractive power of the committee. So he basically he's talking about students who organize, but they don't really organize based off of like former organizers, but just get together, say let's do something, and then they get supported by the people, obviously, but that's all. And I guess he's going to tell us the end result. So as it become wider and the committee expands activity quite spontaneously, the very people who have a year or a few months previously spoke at the student circle studies discussed the question whither, established and maintained contacts with the workers and wrote the published leaflets. Those workers procure literature, set to work, begin to talk of organizing demonstration, and finally turn to open warfare, which may, according to circumstances, take the form of issuing the first agitational leaflets of the first issue of the newspaper, or organizing the first demonstration. Usually the initiation of such actions ends in an immediate and complete fiasco. Immediate and complete because this open warfare was not the result of a systematic and carefully thought out and gradually prepared plan to prolong the stubborn struggle, but simply the result of spontaneous growth of traditional study circle work, because naturally the police in almost every case knew the principal leaders of the local movement, since they had already gained a reputation for themselves in their student days, and the police waited only for the right moment to make their raid. It's so funny. Hold on a second. No, that's so funny. That's really funny. Yeah, so, what was I saying? So basically, it's kind of like the Black Lives Matter, to be honest. But it's really anything that we. Well, like this is so important that you see this from a century ago, right? Where a century ago they're talking about, oh, these students get together, they study some literature, they become well known within their communities, and then the police are just sitting by waiting for the right moment to where everything kind of adds up. The delivery allowed the study circle sufficient time to develop its work so that they might obtain a palpable corpus delicti, and they always permitted several of the persons known to them to remain at liberty for breeding, which, as far as I know, is a technical term used by both our people and by the Jordanes. One cannot help comparing this kind of warfare with that conducted by the mass of peasants armed clubs against modern troops, and one can only wonder at the vitality of the movement, which expanded, grew, and scored victories despite the total lack of training on the part of the fighters. True, from the historical point of view, the primitiveness of equipment was not only inevitable at first, but even legitimate as one of the conditions for the wide recruiting of fighters. But as soon as serious war operations began, and they began in the fact that the strikes of the summer of 1896, the defects in our fighting organizations made themselves felt to an ever-increasing degree. The government, at first thrown into confusion and committing a number of blunders, its appeal to the public, describing the misdeeds of the socialists and of the banishment of workers from the capitals to the provincial industrial centers, very soon adapted itself to the new condition of the struggle and managed to deploy well its perfectly equipped detachments of aging provocateurs, spies, and their names. Raids became so frequent, affected such a vast number of people, and cleared out the local study circles so thoroughly that the masses of the workers lost literally all their leaders. The movement assumed an amazingly sporadic character, and it became utterly impossible to establish continuity and coherence in the work. The terrible dispersion of the local leaders, the fortuitous character of the study circle membership, lack of training in the narrow outlook on theoretical, political, and organizational questions were all the inevitable result of the conditions described above. Things have reached such a pass that in several places the workers became, because of our lack of self-reliance and the inability to maintain secrecy, began to lose faith in the intellectuals and to avoid them. Intellectuals, they say, are much too careless and cause bullshit. This is actually pretty interesting because one thing I want to say is that, when I was talking about the need for leadership among African circles, right? The people who opposed me the most were the socialists, and yet, it seems like Lenin is not one of the main socialists, to think about. He's totally against this spontaneity and very much into leaders and training, So it really behooves me. It's confusing why the modern socialist is so, nominally against leadership, when it seems like it's exactly what we as what you'd expect at least them to be, mature enough to recognize. But of course, leadership is something that we had, in Africa. It's not to say that this is actually a socialist theory, as much as it's really what we as people had in Africa. How long is this podcast? What's going on? All right. Anyone who has the slightest knowledge of the movement is aware that all thinking social democrats have at least begun to regard these amateurish methods as a disease. In order that the reader who is not acquainted with the movement may not have ground for thinking that they are inventing a special stage or special disease of the movement, we shall refer only to the witness we have quoted, we trust shall be forgiven for the length of the passage. So I guess there's somebody who, whatever. While the gradual transition to more extensive practical activity, writes this person, a transition is directly dependent on the general transitional period through which the Russian working class movement is now passing is a characteristic feature. There is, however, another, no less interesting feature in the general mechanism of the Russian Revolution workers, which is felt only in St. Petersburg, but throughout Russia, which is a general revival of the workers' movement. Yeah, but you kind of get it. It's probably just another synopsis of whatever. Primitiveness and economism. Yeah, well, basically, you want to go through a training session. I think it's really imperative that we get to writing. Like, I think we need a pamphlet. I think we need a pamphlet that we really push upon African people. So we're going to have to think about that. It is ridiculous to talk about military organizations fight for immediate political demands. They can show against the employers and the government. Yeah, so we're just gonna keep going. But I think it's worth. Like, I think you can get this. This only because it's becoming a long podcast, and it's actually important that, I mean, also, I kind of want to get some lunch. It's only natural to expect that for a social democrat whose conception of the political struggle coincides with the conception of the economic struggles against the employers and the government, organization of revolutionaries will more or less coincide with the organization of workers. That is, in fact, it actually happens, so that when we, so on and so forth, actively, who will bring about the political revolution, the question of economists, so on and so forth, so on and so forth, and so forth. Let's keep going. Yeah, because I kind of want some lunch, and I kind of think that what we need to do is really go about with, making things happen for ourselves. Uh, Lenin has given some pretty interesting ideas, but I just kind of want to, like for me, it's like we need to get these things done. We need to be serious. And the thing is, just the truth is that a lot of our people are not going to be as serious. Are not going to be serious at all. So, we have a lot of work to do, and I want you to be a part of that work. So, like I said, there's a Discord that you can click onto. Join the Discord. There's also, other ways you could obviously join the. You could contact me on Twitter or whatever. But I think we're going to have a large meeting. And I want you to be a part of it. I want you to be a part of it. So get yourself ready. Conspiratorial organization and democracy. So let's see, what is this? Conspiratorial. So like I said, this is something that you could, like, I want you, like, somebody. You read this and you give me the juice. You give me the good stuff. Conspiracy. So let's see. Inform such strong revolutionary and autocratic must be described as a conspiratorial organization because the French word conspiration is equivalent. Organization must have the utmost secrecy. Secrecy is such a necessary condition for this kind of organization that all the other conditions must be made to conform to it. It would be extremely naive indeed, therefore, to fear the charge that we social democrats desire to create a conspiratorial organization. Such a charge should be flattering to every opponent of economism as a charge following. The objection may be raised that such a powerful and strictly secret organization, which concentrates its hands on the threads of secret activity, which of necessity is centralized, may too easily rush into a premature attack, may thoughtlessly intensify the movement before the growth of political discontent, intensity of the ferment, and the anger of the working class, have made such an attack possible and necessary. Our reply to this is, speaking abstractly, it cannot be denied, of course, that a militant organization may thoughtlessly engage in battle, which may end in a defeat entirely avoidable under other conditions. But we cannot confine ourselves to abstract reasoning on such a question, because every battle bears within itself the abstract possibility of defeat, and there is no way of reducing this possibility except by organized preparation for battle. If there is no way of reducing the possibility of if, however, we proceed from the concrete condition at present obtaining in Russia, we must come to the positive conclusion that a strong revolutionary organization is absolutely necessary precisely for the purpose of giving stability to the movement and of safeguarding it against the possibility of making thoughtless attacks. What is that? Why do I hear something? Hold on a second. I did hear some noise. Sometimes you gotta check if there's things going awry, right? Alright. Up to the present time, when no such organization yet exists, revolutionary movement is rapidly and spontaneously growing. We already observed two opposite extremes. But yeah, like, okay, so this would actually probably would have been something interesting to read about, which is this idea of you want to be able to carry out things secretly. So, like again, I think. Let's see something. Itinerary. Alright, so let me see. Let me make sure I just saved the file. But I think it's worthwhile if we truly go about with having a larger conference. Notice the situation in regards to the second attribute of democracy, the general control. Try to fit this picture into the frame of our autocracy. Feudal in Russia. To show the useful unseemliness, a favorite trick of advancing the plausibility, blah, 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 blah. We ask the reader, in what way does the aeropagus... Okay, let's skip ahead. Local and all Russia work. Oh, okay, local and all Russia work. So that's actually pretty important. So the objection raised against the plan of organization here outlined on the grounds that it is undemocratic and conspiratorial are totally unsound. Nevertheless, there remains a question that's frequently put and which deserves detailed examination. That is the question of the relation between local work and all Russian work. Fears are expressed that the formation of a centralized organization may shift the center of gravity from the former to the latter, damage the movement through weakening our contact with the working masses and the continuity of local agitation generally. To these fears, we reply that our movement in the past few years has suffered precisely from the fact that local workers have been too absorbed in local work, and therefore it is absolutely necessary to shift the center of gravity somewhat to national work, and that far from weakening this would strengthen our ties and continuity for our local agitation. Let us take the question of central and local newspapers. I'd ask the reader not to forget that we cite the publication of newspapers only as an example illustrating an immeasurably broader and more varied revolutionary activity in general. In the first period of the mass movement, an attempt was made by the local revolutionary worker to publish an all-Russia paper. In the next period, the movement made an enormous stride forward, but the attention of the leaders was wholly absorbed by local publications. If we compute the total number of local papers that were published, we shall find that on average one issue per month was published. Does this not clearly illustrate our amateurism? Does it not clearly show that our revolutionary religion lies behind the spontaneous growth of the movement? If the same number of issues had been published not by scattered local groups but by a single organization, we would have saved an enormous amount of effort, but we would have secured immeasurably greater stability and continuity in our work. The simply point is frequently lost sight of by the practical worker who works actively and almost exclusively on local publications. The practical worker usually rests content with the argument that it is difficult for local workers to engage in organization of an all-Russian newspaper, and that local newspapers are better than no newspaper at all. This argument is, of course, perfectly just, and we no less. So yeah, so he's talking about newspapers though. Well, I mean, he says it's like for a larger point, but you kind of get it. You kind of get the larger point now. The defects are accidental. They are inevitable outcome of the fragmentation, which only happens, explains the predominance of local newspapers in the period under review, in order fostered by predominance. It is positively beyond the strength of separate local organizations to raise its newspapers to the level of political organ, maintaining stability of principles. It is beyond its strength to collect and utilize sufficient material to shed light on the whole of our political life. So, yeah, all Africa, so on and so forth. All Africa. Well, he's saying all Russia, but you understand. We're not really talking about newspapers, but it's a good example. It's just like who cares? I mean, of course, we want to. Dang, he's still talking about newspapers. That's crazy. So I'm just scrolling through, and he's still talking about newspapers. So, and of course, the last one is, of course, the plan for an all Russia political newspaper. The most serious blunder of Iskra committed in its connection, writes blah blah blah. The tendency to convert theory into a lifeless doctrine by isolating it from practice was a plan for the general party organization. Martin echoes this idea in declaring that Iskra's tendency to whittle the significance of the forward march to the drab everyday struggle in comparison with the propaganda of brilliant and completed ideas was crowned with the plan for organization of party, which it sets forth in the article entitled Where to Begin, issue. To speak now of an organization held together by an all-Russia newspaper means propagating armchair ideas and armchair work, and represents a manifestation of bookishness. That our theorist turns out to be in agreement with the champion of the forward march, unpleasant, blah blah blah. Who was offended by the article Where to Begin? Okay, I don't really care about who was offended. I don't even know that. I didn't read the article. Yeah, but I mean, I think you guys can get the picture here. Maybe he's talking about the All Russia newspaper. Although I kind of did want to see. Oh, this is the plan for it. And we kind of know how to do this, though, right? I think. Let's see. Let's just see if there's another title. Wait, let's see. I see the word newspaper here. Let us not forget that we are discussing only the rallying organizing activities of the newspaper, and we put up the. So he's talking about something important for the newspaper. But I think, like I said, I'm getting hungry, and yeah, I'm gonna go eat, I guess. Sometimes you think you ate enough, but you didn't. What types of organization do we require? So let's see. Tactics as planned consist in rejecting an immediate call for assault, in demanding to lay effective siege to the enemy fortresses. So you see, you want to lay siege. In other words, in demanding that all efforts be directed towards gathering, organizing, mobilizing a permanent army. This is actually pretty good, actually. Oh man, look at that. This is actually pretty good. So maybe I'll try to see what it is he said, what I skipped through. Because you want to talk about a permanent army. That's one of the things that I really discuss in the Book of Power. That in reality, one of the things that white people had over us is this permanent army, you know, and like you have to grasp that the permanent army thing. That's like one of the most important concepts in the Book of Power. So, or like one of the most important concepts, you know, in like human life. So just the fact that he mentioned it makes me say, let me just read some of this a little bit more, right? Sorry, people. Of course, I'm skipping through it again. All right. Let me check. Let's see. Probably focus on newspaper since there was the primary mode of disseminating info propaganda during that time. Okay. Mchaka is here. Let's see. With a conscientious approach to the work, was it possible to view things otherwise? That is, let's see. The plan for blah, 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 blah. Let's go. That our terrorist turns out to be in agreement with the champion of the forward march of drab everyday struggle is not surprising, as he have traced the roots of this intimacy between them and the chapter on politics and organization. But must draw attention to the fact that, Alright, let us present a small selection of the expletives and exclamations. By what miracle, Iskra, the plan drives our active and virile organization into the kingdom of shadows and desires to call into being the fantastic network of agents, so on and so forth. So I'm trying to get something interesting, because this, you know, like I said, I'm hungry. You know what I'm saying? Like when you hungry, you know what I mean? Like shoot, you know, a lot of things. Like you get when you're hungry, you get to the ideology of the masses. You know what I mean? You know, always hungry. I'm just messing. All right. So the explanation is that the committee and other organizations that are engaged in real work are not playing at democracy. The committee read the article Where to Begin, saw that it represented an attempt to elaborate a definite plan for an organization so that formation may be undertaken from all aspects. And since they knew and saw very well that no one besides would dream of setting about to build it until it was convinced of its necessity and the correctness of the architectural plan, it has naturally never occurred to them to take offense at the boldness of the people who said, in view of the pressing importance of the question, we on one hand have the liberty of submitting to the Congress of the skeleton plan to develop in greater detail the pamphlet now in preparation for the print. So far, subordinate, let's see, picking up the pieces. Can our party develop and make progress if an attempt to raise local functionaries to broader views, task plans, objected to not only the claims that these views are erroneous, but on the ground that they very desire to raise up and gives offense, so on and so forth. But contempt for a writer who sinks so low as to shout about autocracy and subordination does not relieve us of the duty of this entanglement. The confusion of that is the people write in the minds of their reader. Here we can clearly demonstrate the world, the nature of desiring attempt to drive them into the kingdom of shadow, so on and so forth. Persons. All right. The bund hints that we are imposters. Let's see. Second fact: members of the Central Committee of the Bund approach a member of the Iskra. Oh wait, hold on a second. In the report. See, I saw the word secrecy, so I want to go back. In the report, the ideas was suggested that the mere election of the Central Committee would not only fail to solve the question of unification at a time of such complete disorder at the present, but would even compromise the grand idea of establishing a party in the event of an early, swift, and thorough police roundup, which is more than likely in view of the prevailing lack of secrecy, and therefore beginnings should be made by inviting all committees and all organizations to support the revived common organ, which would establish real, so on and so forth. All right, so. Can a newspaper, so the question is, can a newspaper be a collective organizer? In the quintessence of the article, Where to Begin consists in the fact that it discusses precisely this question and gives an affirmative reply to it. As far as we know, the only attempt to examine this question on its merits and prove that it must be answered in the negative was made by whose argument. It pleased us greatly to see Iksra present the question of the need for an all-Russian newspaper, but we cannot agree that this presentation bears relevance to the title Where to Begin. Undoubtedly, this is an extremely important matter, but neither a newspaper nor a series of popular leaflets nor a mountain of manifestos can serve as the basis for a militant organization in revolutionary times. We must set to work to build strong political organizations in the localities. So you see that right here? Look at this. Present the question of the need for an all newspaper, but we cannot agree that this presentation bears relevance to the title Where to Begin. Undoubtedly, it's an extremely important matter, but neither a newspaper nor a series of popular leaflets nor a mountain of manifestos can serve as the basis for a militant organization in revolutionary times. Okay? We must set to work to build strong political organization in the localities. We lack such organizations. We have been carrying on our work mainly among enlightened workers, while the masses have been engaged almost exclusively in the economic struggle. If strong political organizations are not trained locally without significance, will even an excellently organized all Russian newspaper have? It will be a burning bush, burning without being consumed, but firing no one. Isra thinks that around it and the activities on its behalf will gather and organize, but they will find it far easier to gather and organize around activities that are more concrete. This more concrete, so constant activity, blah, 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 blah. Not by means of newspapers can such a unification of local work into an all Russia cause by achieved. We have emphasized the passage in its eloquent tirade that most clearly shows the author's incorrect judgment of our plan as well as the incorrectness of our point of view in general, which is here counterposed and so forth. Yet, what we need is the solution of the question in principle by its practical solution was immediately advance a definite constructive plan, immediately set to work to build from every side. Now we are again being dragged away from the practical solution towards something which is principle, correct, indisputable in general, but which is entirely inadequate and incomprehensible to the broad masses of workers, many to rare, so on and so forth. Almost enlightened workers presented in such a word form of fundamental. So let's see. In recent years, even the enlightened workers has been Snickers, gotcha. In recent years, even the enlightened workers have been engaged almost exclusively in the economic struggle. This is the first point. On the other hand, the masses will never learn to conduct the political struggle until we help to train leaders for the struggle. So look at this. On the other hand, the masses will never learn to conduct the political struggle until we help to train leaders for the struggle, both from among the enlightened workers and from among the intellectuals. Such leaders can acquire training solely by systematically evaluating all the everyday aspects of our political life, all attempts at protest and struggle on the part of the various classes on various grounds. Therefore, to talk of varying political organization at the same time to contrast the paperwork of a political newspaper to live political work is plainly ridiculous. Israel has adapted its plan for newspaper to the plan for creating a military preparedness to support the unemployed movement, peasant control, so forth. Anyone who is at all acquainted with the movement knows full well that the vast majority of local organizations have never even dreamed of these things, that many of the prospects of live political work here indicated have never been realized by a single organization. And the attempt, for example, to call attention to the growth of discontent and protest among the Zemto intellectual arouses feelings of consternation and perplexity. Under these circumstances, it is possible to begin only by inducing people to think about all these things, to summarize and generalize all the diverse signs of ferment and active struggle in our time when social democratic tasks are being degraded. The only way live political work can be begun is with live political agitation, which is impossible unless we have an all-Russian newspaper frequently issued and regularly distributed. So, I mean, it's a good point too to say that you want people to be of like military. Like you're not gonna find people locally, militant without the newspaper, in a sense. I mean, you will obviously, but it's more like you want to be able to communicate that mass consciousness, on a larger level, and without that, like chances are, like you could have some sort of militancy, but the idea is that this level of militancy is not something that you'll have. So, like, for instance, the Haitian Revolution is something that obviously didn't have newspapers per se, but it could have went any other way because of how many diverse interests were at play. It could have went any other way, and the way how it ended, if for those who are, like I said, you read the Book of Power, you'll see how it ended. I mean, you kind of already have a picture of how it ended, but like why it ended that way was almost like inevitable, based off of everything that was going on. So those who regard the Iskra plan as manifestation of bookishness has totally failed to understand its substance and take for the goal suggested as the most suitable means for the present time. These people have not taken to the trouble to study the two comparisons that were drawn to present a clear illustration of the plan. The publication of all must be the main line by which we may unswervingly develop, deepen, and expand the organization. Pray tell me which big layer, so on and so forth, and we are not passing blah blah blah. We are invited to be pseudo-social democrats. The question of uniting local activities in central bodies runs into a vicious circle. lectures us. Unification requires homogeneity of the elements, and the homogeneity can be created only by something that unites, but the unifying element must be the product of strong local organizations, which at the present time by no means distinguished from their homogeneity. The truth is revered. Let's see, bricklayers. Another comparison: a newspaper is not only a collective propagandist and political agitator, it is almost a collective organizer. In this respect, it may be compared to the scaffolding erected around a building under construction. Alright, so don't spin into a well. Let me see, what's that mean? Don't spin into a well, you may want to drink from it. Okay, don't spin into a well, you may want to drink from it. Makes sense. Let's not forget that we are discussing only the rallying. Okay. And finally reached up to that part when I was talking about before. A study cycle has not yet, so on and so forth. Newspaper would be established actual contacts if the newspaper worthy of name is issued regularly, not once a month like a magazine, but at least 4 times a month. Present time, communication between towns of revolutionary business and extremely rarity at all events is an exception rather than the rule. If we had a newspaper, however, such a communication would become the rule and would secure not only the distribution of the newspaper. So he's saying you want a weekly newspaper, not a monthly newspaper. Monthly newspaper being a magazine. Okay. I'm grateful. That's what we dream of. So I think this is pretty much what kind of organization do we require. Toss in the crowd. So yeah, I think I'm gonna. What's the revolution itself? Bookishness. They're complaining about bookishness. So like I said, the article is available for those who want to read it. Like I said, I was going to skim it. In other words, the plan for our original is far from representing the fruits of labor of the armchair workers, further with dogmatism, and it is most practical plan for immediate and all around with the same aim, no loss of sight. Okay. No loss of sight for a moment on the present day-to-day work. So that's what I'm saying. That's the book, if you will. Hope you enjoyed it. It was actually pretty informative, interesting. And I mean, it does tell us, in essence, what is to be done, or what we can do, and what we should do. And so, thank you for joining me. It's been a long speech. I think I'm going to ask you guys to come through and actually, we have like a platform where we actually discuss for ourselves what we need to do, or how we can, effectively create the propaganda necessary to reach our people and really get us, for 2021, forward and really serious about Pan-African nationalism. And the only question is, what day do you want to do it? Because I'm down for it. Anyway, but thank you so much for listening, and of course, Shami Htp.